Hey guys, this is Frank Yecker, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
Hey, this is Rich Franklin.
What's up, everybody? This is Chris Lieben. This is Diego Sanchez. Randy Couture.
Alistair Overeem.
Hi, this is Stephen Bonner.
This is Don Fry.
Hey, I'm Phil, Mr. Wonderful Davis.
TJ Dillashaw.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Submission Radio. Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Welcome to Submission Radio, episode 126. It's Wednesday, the 31st of May. Dennis Gradov here with Kasper Ozolowski. After a week off, due to the episode not being able to be put together due to some drama with the UFC retreat, huh, Cass?
I know. We had some sexy guests lined up. Believe us, they were sexy. And unfortunately, a few last-minute cancellations. We were like, well, you know what? We don't want to be putting out any kind of subpar programming. And unfortunately, it just didn't work out, which sucked badly because there was a lot to discuss that week. It was a very eventful week last week, but we are hoping to make it up for you guys this week. We've got some fun guests. It is a UFC 212 preview show. A lot to be discussed. We'll be talking about some of the things that happened last week. We'll be talking about the retreat. We'll be talking about UFC Sweden a little bit. We've got some fun guests. We've got Brett Okamoto making his first ever Submission Radio appearance. He'll be the first on the show. He'll be talking to us about a whole bunch of the current topics in MMA. Then we'll be getting Luke Thomas on the show afterwards to continue the trend and also preview UFC 212. And then we'll be having Robin Black afterwards, strictly UFC 212, and to get a little bit of an update on Robin Black in general. A lot of people know, obviously, he's got his great YouTube channel. He's no longer with the Fight Network. He's got some fun things on the horizon. And then Dennis, yourself, and I will be talking about UFC 212 afterwards as well, addressing some of the other big things that are happening in the week. Obviously, this TJ Dillashaw, Demetrious Johnson fight. Do we like it? Do we not like it? Are we for it? Cyborg, Magana, all the drama there. And of course, our very own predictions to hopefully help all the punters out there. So it's a stacked show.
That's right, a packed show. Plus, we do John Wick 2 reviews at the end of the program, so tune in to see if that movie is worth checking out and what me and Kasper thought. And of course, another man joining the show today is going to be making an appearance as Tommy Toehold. We love him coming onto the program and sort of getting us excited for these events, giving us his thoughts on what's going down or what to look out for. We love these little appearances that he makes on Submission Radio, so I'm excited to see what he has to say today, Cass, because whenever Tommy Toehold speaks, people listen.
Oh yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at SubmissionAUS and Facebook, facebook.com/SubmissionRadioAUS. We are very accessible. You can send us messages anytime. We don't even have to be following you back. We love chatting with you guys. We love getting emails from you, info@SubmissionRadio.com. We've had many a conversation with you guys via email. And the YouTube comments, that's the main thing. Give us your predictions in the YouTube comments below. If you are watching on YouTube, comment on anything that's here that's been discussed, anything that Brett says, anything that Luke says, anything that Robin says, anything that we say, whether you agree, disagree, give us your thoughts, good, bad, we love it all and we take it all. If you are feeling frisky, jump on iTunes, give us a review, however many stars you think we deserve. You don't even have to say anything, we'll take a full stop because we love checking out your reviews and of course it helps the program. But without further ado, it is a big show, a lot to talk about, a lot of journalists to speak to, and I believe, Dennis, our first guest is on the line.
All right, guys, you may recognize our next guest from his appearance on the highly touted and decorated UFC 205 Submission Radio Lounge at Madison Square Garden. More importantly, he does amazing work covering MMA for ESPN, and when he's not on TV, he lends his silky smooth voice to his podcast, 5 Rounds, which features a slew of great guests and big names and awesome discussion. So we're really, really happy to have one of the nicest guys in the game, Brett Okamoto, make his Submission Radio debut for the first time. Brett, welcome to Submission Radio.
Thank you so much. Happy to hop on and talk some fights with you guys.
Oh, we absolutely appreciate it. From the bright lights of the Submission Radio Lounge to the weekly show, it's great to have you here. A lot of things to talk about. Obviously, we want to start with Gustafsson's impressive win this past weekend at UFC Stockholm. Last time is in Sweden, Alexander got brutally knocked out, unfortunately, by Rumble Johnson. Now he was able to use his own uppercuts to pick apart a seemingly almost Terminator-like Glover Teixeira, and even proposed to his girlfriend afterwards. What did you think about Alexander Gustafsson's performance this past weekend, Brett?
Yeah, I mean, just about as close to flawless as you can get. Gustafsson was never it was never in question like where he was in the division, right? He was right behind John Jones and Daniel Cormier. And when I say right behind, like right behind, we know how close of a fight he gave both of those guys. But, he had been dealing with some back injuries. His last fight prior to this, he won, but it was not, the most spectacular of performances. And you just started to wonder, is it ever going to happen for Alexander Gustafsson, or did he get, his best opportunities and did he just come close and never really cash in on them? Like, is that going to be the story with Alexander Gustafsson? And this was a performance, a reminder of, exactly what this guy is capable of, how good he can be on any given night. It took him a while to get Glover Teixeira out of there, but I really do see that as a credit to Teixeira, not a detriment to Gustafsson. Teixeira, he was fighting like it was life and death, that this was his last shot at potentially getting into title contention. You could see that in just, how prepared he was. He was in good shape. You can't be in bad shape and take the punishment that he took and still continue to fight. And he did. He persevered into that 5th round, but it was a showcase fight for Gustafsson in front of his home crowd. And we knew that he was going to be in the title contention one way or the other coming off of a win like this, but now you're excited about it. Now you're saying not only is he in title contention, but I really want to see him in that rematch against Jon Jones. I really want to see him fight Daniel Cormier again, because I give him a very good chance of winning, a real chance of winning.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, he kind of picked that feud up again with Jon Jones, said some stuff at the post-fight press conference, and all of a sudden everyone's like, whoa, all right, yeah, we remember this. This is great. They had this great close fight initially, and now we're excited about a potential rematch. But if we are looking at what's next for him, I mean, what would you do with him? He had that, like you mentioned, epic war with Cormier. That could be a fun rematch. Do you think he fights the winner of Jones-Cormier, or what do you have in mind for him? Because a lot of people obviously bring up Jimmy Manuwa. They're friends. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. What happens to Gus in the meantime?
Well, I hate to say it this way, because I like Jimmy Manuwa, and I think he's doing all the right things. He's gotten some big highlight finishes, and he's going back and forth with Cormier on social media, and he's creating headlines. He's doing everything that you would ask him to do, but I think he draws the short end on this one. Gustafsson looking as good as he did against Teixeira, and then just that history that he has with those two guys, Jones and Daniel Cormier. I think especially if it's Jon Jones, he's the only real close fight that Jon Jones has ever had. I don't consider Jon Jones in DC the first fight. Yeah, it was not a blowout, but I never really felt like Jon Jones didn't have control during that first fight he had with DC. When he fought Alexander Gustafsson, he was not in control during that fight. I think anybody would say that. So, if Jon Jones is the champion and Gustafsson's right there, I don't think you have any other choice but to do the rematch. I don't think you can go with Jimmy Manuwa. I'm sure you can build a case for that, but you have to go with Gustafsson. You have to strike while the iron's hot. And right now, Gustafsson, he was in a position where, hey, man, if you look absolutely spectacular, maybe you can leapfrog Jimmy Manuwa. And that's what he did. He was absolutely spectacular. So I do believe that he jumped in line, and I think he's next. I think he faces the winner of Jones versus Cormier on July 29th.
And from everything that you understand, I mean, a lot of rumors going on around how the UFC, may not 100% trust Jon Jones in the main event of UFC 214, and how in the back of their mind they have a secret backup plan in case he falls out and a Gustafsson steps up or a Jimmy Manuwa step up. Do you know, have the UFC been in touch with Gus or spoken to Gus or Jimmy about the possibility of Jones somehow falling out last minute and them replacing Jones against DC at UFC 214? Is that a thing, or is that like a rumor that just went wildly out of control on the internet?
No, I don't look at it as a rumor. If they wanted it to be Gustafsson, they would have had to have those conversations pretty quickly, right? I mean, the guy just fought, and he did just go 5 rounds. I know that it was one-sided, but that was a 5-round fight. Dana White had told me weeks ago that all right, we're going to do the main event. We're going to have it be the main event, but we're going to put Jimmy Manuwa on that card as insurance. Manuwa, he looked around the division. He said, who am I going to fight? The only guy that really makes sense is Shogun Rua. And, Shogun, from what I understand, might be dealing with some injuries. So I think that there's still some navigating and some figuring out exactly where the pieces fit. I do think that the UFC, well, I know that the UFC, because White told me directly, they want to have Manuwa on that card, and that would make a lot of sense. With as snake-bitten as that fight between Cormier and Jones has been over the years, why wouldn't you put Jimmy Manuwa in some facet on the card? But you're not just talking about a guy like, all right, we'll just throw him on the card against anybody. He's, a contender who has certain thoughts on what fights he should be getting. It won't be Gustafsson. They won't do that fight on UFC 214, but I do believe that if they can get the right opponent and the right matchup and the right fight that Manoa would agree to, that yes, ideally they will have him on that card.
Wow, exciting. And just before we get off light heavyweight in this whole topic, just curious, where do you sit on what's next for Glover? Because he's been, through some serious wars, and he's been brutally knocked out in the last 2 of his 3 fights. He's lost to most of the top contenders in the division, and he's turning 38 later this year. How do you see his future looking, and who do you think the UFC should put him up against to sort of bounce back? Do they throw him in with the killers, or do they give him sort of maybe a fight to get his confidence back?
Well, there's not that many killers at light heavyweight, if we're being brutally honest here. There's just not that much talent at light heavyweight. So Glover is going to be a guy who doesn't just disappear. This was a bad knockout, and he took a lot of damage, but it didn't seem as if his chin was compromised in this fight, clearly. I mean, you saw how much damage he took. So he's still a very durable guy. He's a guy who can beat the middle part of his division. He's proven that beyond any shadow of a doubt. As far as him getting any higher than he's been before, I just don't think it's in the cards for Glover. You look at the fights that he's had, the fights that he's lost. Not only has he came up short against the top talent of his division, the Gustafssons, the Joneses, the Phil Davises, the Anthony Johnsons of the world, but he has come up hugely on the underside. I mean, it's just those fights have not gone his way at all. They all were one-sided in their own ways. So. Expecting him to all of a sudden turn things around and become a new fighter and win a title, I don't think is realistic. He'll be a guy who just sort of hangs around, I think, collects some paychecks, still produces some good knockout moments because he's got a lot of power. I think the ship has sailed in terms of him being a UFC champion.
And I mean, obviously, coming into the UFC at a later age, you shudder to think what would have happened if those visa problems didn't occur and he came in a little bit earlier. But let's jump to another matchup the fans are excited to possibly see, and that's, of course, TJ Dillashaw possibly fighting Demetrious Johnson in Seattle in August. However, Mighty Mouse, he's not really sold on the idea. He would rather face a Ray Borg. From what you know, Brett, I mean, what's going on here? Is this fight likely to get put together?
Well, it's a fight that Dana White likes. And so, if there's a fight that Dana White really likes and wants to happen, and he's willing to negotiate and talk to the different parties involved. I mean, that's really become part of fight negotiations. I mean, in years past, it used to be if the UFC wanted to put together a fight, boom, it was put together. Now, fighters are realizing that there are moments in their careers where they have leverage and, they can make certain demands, and then it becomes a negotiation, even though they are under a contract already. We've seen that numerous times. So, I would normally say, White likes the fight. To me, I don't really look at TJ Dillashaw as jumping any line down at flyweight. I think, he's a title contender at 135. He's a former champion. I mean, his resume sort of speaks for itself. I don't really agree necessarily with he needs to go down and win one fight at 125 pounds in order to leapfrog Ray Borg. I just don't. I think that's kind of a flimsy argument. I can see why people might make that argument, but I'm just not in agreement with it. So, I don't know. So normally I would say, hey, this fight is going to happen. But because Demetrious Johnson has taken such a public stance against it, I think then the conversation then becomes, well, how exactly long is Cody Garbrandt going to be out? Because it's not as if TJ Dillashaw is in need of a big fight. He has a big fight against Cody Garbrandt. It's just, when can that fight take place? How long is Cody Garbrandt out? So I think that question sort of comes into whether or not we will see Demetrious Johnson versus TJ Dillashaw. And whatever that answer is, that's going to have a big effect on that potential fight.
Let me ask you this, Brett. You sound like you're down for this fight. You sound like you're interested in something that you would think would be a lot of fun. Obviously, Demetrious is saying that he's not a big fan, or at least he's saying that there is a bit of a queue. What do you, as far as the public perception so far, it's been predominantly negative. What do you think is what do you think is the upside of Demetrious Johnson for, I guess, turning down this fight and facing a guy like Ray Borg? Some people are saying maybe he's using it as leverage to sort of set up a title fight in the future. If he does break Anderson Silva's record, do you think that it really does give him a lot more leverage than what he may already have in the UFC?
No, I don't necessarily think holding the record is all of a sudden going to give Demetrious Johnson all this leverage. What gives you leverage is if the fans want to see you fight, and the fans have never really gotten behind Demetrious Johnson. And by him doing this and almost declining the fight against TJ Dillashaw, that almost kind of adds on to that, I think, because the fans really, like you said, the reaction to this has been mostly negative. So if you're looking at Demetrious Johnson's motives in this, I really think there's two ways of looking at it. One is that it's all just contract negotiations and him trying to get as much money as he can and him publicly saying he doesn't want to fight, but really that's just to put pressure on the UFC to give him more money. Or it's that he legitimately looks at it and says, hey, man, Ray Borg is a much easier fight for me than TJ Dillashaw. And I know that the fans want their fighters to be warriors and they want them to step up and take every risk and every big obstacle and be looking around for the toughest guy. And I understand that. And I'm not saying that fans shouldn't feel that way. But you also got to remind yourself, as a fighter, if you have an option, and you're saying that I could fight Ray Borg or I could fight TJ Dillashaw, and let's just assume that the money is the same, like which one would you choose? Demetrious Johnson is still a human being. He's still trying to look out after his family. So if he can potentially go an easier route, break the record, still have a belt around his waist at the end of the night, I think a lot of fans who were criticizing him that would ask themselves, like, would you do the same thing? And again, I know that that's not a fun conversation to have about this sport because we want our champions to be warriors and to be looking for the next big challenge. But in reality, I think there's a little bit of that going on. That to me, Demetrious Johnson has one win to break Anderson Silva's record, and he's looking at a situation in which TJ Dillashaw is a much, much more difficult fight. And if he's not getting paid substantially more, then which fight would you expect him to want? You'd expect him to want the easier fight.
And do you think the UFC would pay him substantially more if they did try and get this TJ Dillashaw fight together? Or do you think it's not in Dana White's mind a super fight, or it's just another title defense for Demetrious?
Yeah, that's the negotiation that would have to take place, And again, I do think that how long Cody Garbrandt is out plays into this. If Garbrandt is out for a long time, then this fight is much more attractive to the UFC, right? Because they haven't had a great year, And this is a fight that would capture the imagination of some people. And I will say that Dana White is just straight up a fight fan in a lot of ways, and I think he likes this idea. He likes the idea of TJ Dillashaw dropping down and trying to stop Demetrious Johnson from breaking the record. So I do think that they would negotiate on this fight as far as, are they willing to completely open the pocketbooks and pay Demetrious Johnson whatever he wants? No, I don't think that ever really fully exists, that situation. But I do think that they're willing to listen. But again, how long is Garbrandt going to be out? If he's going to be out for a little while, then maybe the UFC says, all right, you know what, fine. Demetrious doesn't want this fight. We'll just have TJ wait, just a little bit. And then we still got a great fight between him and Garbrandt.
And speaking of Garbrandt, from what you understand, it's all a bit murky at the moment, but do you have any kind of idea as to how long he'll be out or when he could possibly return?
Well, I know that the people around him wanted him to just chill, and this guy's 25 years old, and I know that there's a pressure and an expectation to keep the momentum going, but he's in a great spot. He finished the year on such a high note by beating Dominic Cruz, becoming the champion. This guy was on absolute fire. And so, why rush it? I think that there's definitely some pressure on Cody to hurry back. But I also think that, if I was around him, and I know that people around him are telling him this, like, hey man, you don't have to rush. Like, let's just make sure that you're good. Let's make sure that you're healthy. And back injuries can be a little tricky. They're hard to diagnose. They're hard to get a time frame, an exact time frame on when you're going to start feeling better. And you would not want to agree to a fight and then have to pull out again. So I think it's going to be, I haven't heard anything in terms of it's going to be a really long time before we see Cody Garbrandt, and I would expect to see him sooner rather than later. But I do hope that whatever he decides that he does get right, because to me, it would just be a waste to see this guy 25 years old come back before he's ready and then, experience another setback or go into a fight when he's not 100%. That to me would not make any sense.
Of course, and especially one with so much on the line, like one with TJ Dillashaw. While I was sort of speaking about, loosely talking about Dana White negotiations and things like that, Brett, Dana recently said that, well, basically what a lot of people were thinking during a chat with Snoop Dogg of all people, he mentioned how there's a real possibility that Conor McGregor may not fight in the UFC again after making, $60 or $70 million for the Mayweather boxing match. What do you think of Dana actually admitting it publicly like this? Because it seems like such a big 180 from him originally saying that the fight won't happen to now actually suggesting the UFC's biggest star may never return. I think a lot of people speculated it, but it's a bit different when it's, he says it and it's public. Do you buy into it? And do you think McGregor fights again in the UFC after such a huge payday?
I do think McGregor would fight again, and maybe I feel like I'm sort of in the minority more and more on that. I think that the more conversations I have with people, the more people are like, "There's no way he'd come back," and I do think he would come back. I just think he would be very selective in the fights he took, and he would be demanding big paydays, as he should at that point. So to answer your question, do I think he would come back after a Floyd Mayweather fight? I do. I just don't think he would be, your typical UFC lightweight champion, line him up, I'll knock him down. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think he's going to be selective. In terms of how surprised I was Dana saying this, yeah, I was pretty shocked that he would admit this publicly. I think maybe, he's got a good relation with Snoop Dogg, and there was just some real talk. Snoop was able to get some truth out of Dana in a way that sometimes even journalists can't. But I will also say that what he's saying it's not like it's earth-shattering. It's not like it's anything that didn't cross anybody's mind. It was just strange to see the UFC president himself admit it. But, you look at the words of what he said, and it's like, well, yeah, of course, there's a chance he might never fight again. That's obvious. So, but yeah, seeing him tell it to Snoop on a YouTube gangster network news or whatever he calls that that's how journalism in 2017, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And Snoop Dogg getting better scoops than 90% of the media in MMA as well. You got to love that as well. Snoop's just taken over all industries. I mean, let's just quickly talk about this negotiation as well, Brett, because we've been told before that Dana doesn't actually do any of the negotiating with Conor anymore, and that it was always the Fertittas in the past. Chris Weidman famously met up with Lorenzo before UFC 205 to negotiate his deal. Do you know if the Fertittas were involved in these negotiations at all?
Involved in the negotiations, that can mean a whole lot of different things, right? I mean, even if it was a meeting between, Conor McGregor and Lorenzo Fertitta that softened Dana White's stance, that would be part of the negotiations. You could classify it as that, right? So to think that Lorenzo is just gone is incorrect, right? And we know that to be incorrect. I will say that, from what I hear, he's enjoying being away from the day-to-day operations and stresses of running the UFC. But that doesn't mean that, if Conor McGregor wants to go and try and box Floyd Mayweather, that Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta are not talking about that in some capacity. I say that is the best way to put it, is that Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta were best friends for years. They weren't just business partners, they were friends. And Dana White highly, highly, highly respects the opinion of Lorenzo Fertitta. He credits him for, his own career. So, yes, if Conor McGregor comes to Las Vegas and meets with Lorenzo Fertitta, has a good meeting, they exchange ideas, and then those ideas then make it to Dana White's brain through the mouth of Lorenzo Fertitta, then that's an influence, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is yes, he's still involved in these things, but not on a day-to-day real high, intense level.
And just on this matchup, obviously, as most people would say, there's a very little chance that, that Conor McGregor is able to beat Floyd. But if in some freak occurrence, and that's no disrespect to Conor McGregor, he does somehow beat Floyd and he does win, do you think it's unlikely in any scenario that we see Conor McGregor stay in boxing and potentially collect bigger paydays rather than return to MMA? Would his UFC contract even allow it? Or do you think in some way, the way this fight plays out would sort of ruin any chance of that happening?
I mean, we're talking about a universe that I really, really have a hard time putting myself in. That Conor McGregor just knocked out Floyd Mayweather. But if that were to happen, dude, I have no idea what would happen. That's really the best answer. Because at that point, all bets are off. We are living in an insane, crazy world if Conor McGregor knocks Floyd Mayweather out in boxing ring. But no, his contract would not allow that. At least I'm assuming so. I don't believe that he's signed some universal release that says he can box whenever he wants. He's still under exclusive contract with the UFC. I'm sure the UFC expects him to come back. And quite honestly, I don't know if Conor would want to stay in boxing. Especially if he continued to split his paydays with the UFC. I mean, wherever he can make the most money, of course, is always going to be attractive. But at the same time, I think that Conor really enjoys mixed martial arts more than he enjoys boxing. He prefers to have all of the weapons at his disposal as opposed to just one left hand and one right hand. So I would think his passion would always lie in mixed martial arts. But yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point about the money. I guess it would just depend on what the UFC wanted and what they would agree to, and what would make the most money for everybody. That's always, the question to ask.
I mean, the other big question, I guess, Brett, is what is the latest news on this boxing match? I mean, we're always hearing a little bit of news here, a little bit of news there. Oh, Conor McGregor's deal's being sorted out. Now it's time for Floyd Mayweather. But really, has there been any movement? And also, a lot of people make it sound like, oh, Conor McGregor signed his deal. It's just a matter of, days before Mayweather agrees to his. But how long could it, reasonably take for Floyd Mayweather to agree to a deal for this fight?
It took Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao 5 years. So I don't know. I don't know how long it could take. I mean, it could take years, or it could take, weeks. It's we're talking about something that really hasn't been done before, but we're also talking about something in which all the parties involved are going to get very, very rich. So there's incentives for all parties to get the contract done. And as far as an update goes, we're relying on now. We're waiting on the boxing side, I guess. Isn't that weird that there's been we're waiting on the MMA side and then we're waiting on the boxing side? I guess right now, if you were to say one or the other, we're waiting for the boxing side, right? I just feel like, you look at Floyd Mayweather's comments that he says he's looking forward to sign his end of the deal. He's acknowledged that Conor has signed his end of the deal. I don't think now it's just going to all of a sudden disappear in a way in which, I would imagine we've been getting updates nonstop for the last year, right? So what would the next one be? I believe the next one would be Floyd coming out and saying, I've agreed to, my side of the deal, at least. It was Showtime, my business partners, my arrangements. I've made my demands clear. I've agreed in principle to this fight, and yet, there's not necessarily a huge fight announcement. Because these guys have to negotiate who even gets to announce the fight. That's going to be part of the negotiation is who gets to tell everybody about this thing. But I do believe that it would not surprise me if at some point, because Floyd, if you're really looking at it, I mean, who's winning the publicity side now? Well, I would say that maybe Conor is, because Conor says he's agreed to the fight, so he can go on Instagram and post photos of him with boxing gloves on and say, hey, if you don't sign the fight, then you're the one who backed out. You're the one who's scared of getting in a ring with me. So I guess he's at a public perception advantage, if that counts for anything, which I think it does. And so I would imagine that Floyd is going to say something that we're all going to be writing about and talking about, but it's not going to be an official fight announcement quite yet.
Let's hope McGregor doesn't jump the gun, tweets out something like, the fight's on, thanks for the cheese, 60,000 retweets.
Possibly, man. Yeah.
A lot of people into the boxing world have been coming out and obviously, putting their thoughts out on the fight, and a lot of negative things, which is understandable. Boxing legend Oscar De La Hoya wrote an open letter recently about the match saying, if you thought Mayweather-Pacquiao was a black eye for the sport, a matchup between the two of the best pound-for-pound fighters that simply didn't deliver, just wait until the best boxer of a generation dismantles someone who has never boxed competitively at any level, amateur or professional. And De La Hoya wrote, our sport might never recover. Do you think De La Hoya is being a little bit overdramatic here, or can this actually hurt the sport of boxing to such a degree?
No, I don't think it hurts the sport of boxing at all. I don't really see De La Hoya's point, to be quite honest. I mean, if Floyd goes out there and is boring and wins a 12-round decision, that sums up Floyd Mayweather's boxing career over the last 7 years. And he continues to be the highest seller in pay-per-view history. So any eyeball, any attention is good attention, especially when you're talking about combat sports. If you have the two biggest stars in combat sports involved in the same promotion, that is not a bad thing for either sport. And I think that anybody who gets into this conversation of, well, because most people are looking at it from the flip side. Well, what if the MMA fighter goes over and he gets beat so badly that now boxing can say, oh, look, these aren't real athletes. The best fighters are clearly go to boxing because the MMA guys can't handle boxing. Like, there may be some people out there who believe that, but by and large, there's not going to be anyone out there who really is like, oh, I'm never buying a Conor McGregor UFC fight again because he lost to Floyd Mayweather boxing match. I just don't see that. I think the exposure completely outweighs any of the negative perceptions that fans on either sport may take. No, I think this is Oscar getting in on the publicity himself. This thing is such an enormous monster of publicity, that that you just attach your name to it. If you're someone like Oscar De La Hoya, why not? Bob Arum, attach your name to it. Come out and throw out your opinion. Say Manny Pacquiao's in the mix. Talk about, Bob can come out and say, oh, the UFC is demanding this, this, and this of UFC's contract, and it doesn't matter. You could just attach your name to those headlines. It's beneficial for you. That's all this is to me when I'm looking at Oscar's comments.
And I mean, Manny Pacquiao on the other side of the coin, going up to here to Australia to fight a relatively unknown fighter in a fight that most people won't probably even watch. And then you got Floyd Mayweather on the other side of the coin, possibly having a huge pay-per-view against a guy that everybody knows. So it's pretty funny how things are playing out. Let's quickly, and Brett, we really appreciate the time. We'll let you go in just a couple of minutes because you're a busy man and you do a lot of awesome things in the world of MMA. But we just want to quickly ask you about this GSP Michael Bisping fiasco that's been happening in front of our eyes ever since that press conference went down and they announced the fight. I mean, look, I believe GSP was on the MMA hour. He spoke about the fact that, the UFC knew that he had issues with his eye, that they knew that he was going to be out until later on. However, from everything that we understand, from everything that Dana White said, it seemed like they were under the impression this fight was going to happen, summertime this year in America. So I don't understand. I mean, fill in the gaps for us from what you know. What exactly went wrong? Where did the wires get crossed? Did the UFC really not realize GSP was not going to be able to fight in July? Or is this just a whole big confusion from their end?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question that you ask, is did they know? Because if they knew, then what are we doing? Why did we do the press conference? And why are you putting pressure on him to fight on July 8th on International Fight Week, which that International Fight Week, of course, could use GSP versus Michael Bisping. So you understand from a promotional standpoint why the UFC was, in some ways a little desperate to get GSP to fight on that card. But if you knew that he couldn't fight until July, that he couldn't fight in July and then he wouldn't be able to fight until essentially the winter time, then what was all of this really about? And I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, you kind of have two sides saying two different things. White always said that we're not exactly sure when the fight's going to happen. We want it to happen in July. I mean, he said that right there at that press conference. He was standing up there, GSP to his left, Michael Bisping was to his right, and he said, I would like this fight to happen in July. And George never raised his hand and said, hey, I've already told you I can't fight by July. Hey, everybody, all you fans out there, who are expecting this fight, it's not going to happen in July, and who knows, maybe he didn't know, maybe he was having still meetings with his physicians, but if that was the case, then what he's saying now is disingenuous by saying that the UFC knew he couldn't fight this summer. I don't know. It is a weird situation. It's a weird situation in which it was pretty clear early on that the UFC wanted him to fight on that big fight card in July, and now he's coming out and saying that, no, I was never in play for that. I mean, this sort of falls in line just with the UFC George St-Pierre relationship. You can date this all the way back to when St-Pierre fought Johnny Hendricks, and Dana White was upset about the way that fight was scored, said that they were going to do it a rematch right away. George was saying, I'm thinking about walking away from the sport. I need some time off, like health-wise, I'm not great. I need some time to get my life in order. Dana was completely dismissive of that. You've had these two sides not on the same page for a really long time now. So I guess, everything playing out the way that it has is not all that shocking. I mean, the question now is, where does it go from here? Michael Bisping and George St-Pierre want to fight each other, but that was with a middleweight championship involved, and that was when there was no interim middleweight champion. I mean, now you're going to have an interim middleweight champion. I just don't see how you could have Michael Bisping fight George St-Pierre and leave out in the cold your newly crowned interim champion. I mean, we're living in a weird world with the UFC, and they're doing some strange things that is catching us by surprise, but that one would be indefensible. You can't crown an interim champion and then have George St-Pierre make his middleweight debut and leapfrog your interim champion. That would be insane. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with that one, but it is interesting how just not on the same page whatsoever the UFC and George St-Pierre remained.
It's interesting because we're talking about alternate universes, these bizarro worlds where ridiculous things happen, and even this seems like such a ridiculous thing that if you said this, 6 or 8 months ago, it would have been hard to believe. I feel like one day we'll have you on in the next 6 months, Brett, and then we'll be talking about, wow, that ridiculous scenario, it actually did take place. There is an interim title where we're seeing GSP versus Bisping. But just quickly, last question before we let you go, Brett. The other fights that were in play for GSP, obviously, that a lot of fans theorized about were Anderson Silva and, of course, Nick Diaz. From what you understand, why didn't the UFC go for these fights initially? Why did they want him in a title fight in either welterweight or middleweight? And is there a chance that maybe they go over these fights when he comes back to welterweight potentially next?
Yeah, well, it was my understanding that those aren't the fights that St-Pierre wanted. I think that you have a lot of options when you have a guy who's a superstar in Canada, a longtime welterweight champion who's coming back for the first time in 3 years. You have all kinds of options. So then it's about, okay, well, which is the best option? And George, like so many other middleweights in the UFC right now, look at Bisping as a very beatable champion. And so that was his first choice. Like, I can get a title shot on my first fight. I can be a two-weight world champion. That'll be written on my resume forever. Welterweight champion, middleweight champion. And if I win that my stock only goes higher. And now, what are the options? Now I can potentially fight Conor McGregor if I wanted to. GSP is thinking big, as he should. He should be coming back and trying to maximize his position in the sport, which is a very good one. I mean, the UFC needs a star, and they need a big fight. And so George is saying, hey, I'm a star, so I'm going to handpick whatever fight I want. I don't think George is scared of fighting anybody. And the Anderson fight, we know Anderson Silva would want that fight. But if you're George, do you take that fight? That's probably your fourth or fifth or sixth option. So, I don't think it's necessarily the UFC that's saying, oh, we really wanted to have St-Pierre fight Bisping. It's just that they need a star. That's what St-Pierre wanted. And so they tried to give him what he wanted. And now they're in a weird situation because of how long it took to put that fight together.
Man, weird and freaky times. Brett, we really appreciate your time. Guys, make sure to listen to 5 Rounds. This is an awesome podcast that Brett does every week. And follow Brett on Twitter at Boka. Let me spell this out here. Bokamoto ESPN. Okamoto ESPN. Does that sound right, Brett?
It's B as in Brett, obviously, and then my last name, right, which is Okamoto. Just like it sounds, Okamoto. Yep.
How about that? I don't pick up on these things. No subtle hints. Girlfriend's always having a go at me over it. But Brett, thank you so much for coming into the program. Again, make sure to follow him on Twitter and check out his UFC 212 coverage. Always the man with the best breaks and news in the game. Such a pleasure having you on the program. Brett Okamoto, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Appreciate it. No problem. See you guys.
This is Chael Sonnen, and you are listening to Submission Radio.
All right, guys. Our next guest is one of the most respected analysts in MMA. Other than his great work on MMAfighting.com, he's also the host of the Luke Thomas Show on SiriusXM Rush 93, Mondays through to Fridays. He's also hosting and has always hosted 2 phenomenal podcasts, Monday Morning Analyst and his live chat Promotional Malpractice. You can also watch him on the MMA Beat. Man, you do a lot of stuff, Luke. He returns back to Submission Radio to talk about UFC 212 and a couple of other things. Luke Thomas, welcome back to the program. How's it going today?
It goes well, gentlemen. Thank you for having me.
Well, look, let's start with the big one. We see you're on Facebook. You've been finding it hard to put into words the whole baffling situation with Germaine de Randamie refusing to fight Cris Cyborg and claiming it's because she's a cheater. Have you found the words now? And what do you make of this ordeal?
I did have the words. Finally, I had it today. It took me a while to get to it because, look, what is everyone saying about it? Everyone's saying that she's scared. And I struggled with that a little bit. I'm not saying it's not true. I don't know whether she feels that way. I often feel like what happens is that fighters often make calculations about their careers, and we want to paste on top of it some schoolyard formation, or I should say some schoolyard conception about fighting in those contexts. Are you going to stand up to the bully? Are you afraid of conflict? Because, you look at someone like Germaine de Randamie, she's been fighting, for being years at the highest level in 2 different sports, 3 in some senses, right? Like, she's been really getting after it. So it's like, is she really frightened in that sense? Again, I'm not saying it's not true, but I, as a journalist, have a real hard time coming out and saying this fighter is afraid. But I think what you can say is, if you are like me, reluctant to use the scared word, Well, I think what you can say is it's just totally, totally, totally irresponsible. There is no good defense of her actions. None. If you didn't want to fight Cyborg, that is totally okay. You don't have to. Fighters make calculations about who they want to fight and when they want to fight them all the time. In some ways, this is perfectly rational. You just don't get to make that when you've decided to fight for a title and then you win it. And then you mean to tell me that this person had an issue with USADA when in fact she was almost entirely exonerated. Cyborg is the number one contender and by a country mile the money fight for her. It's indefensible. It's totally indefensible. It is an absolute abdication of her championship responsibility. It is a waste of everyone's time that she went ahead and accepted that fight with Holm. And really, she has to have a long look in the mirror about why she did it and what it all means. But I find it shocking and totally, absolutely unjustifiable.
Yeah, it is baffling, but also so intriguing at the same time because there's so many questions. She claimed on the MMA Hour back in February that the Cyborg fight will eventually happen and that it would be an honor to fight a great champion like Cris. And this was knowing that Cris had already been flagged by USADA in December. So I guess one of the questions is, all right, in her mind, let's it's a gray area. Let's say she's not scared, but she's going to be probably giving up that belt, going back down to 135. What do you see as, I guess the upside to what she's doing? What is she gaining by going back down to 135 and losing the belt and potentially a huge money fight? What is she doing it for?
Maybe she believes that because she beat Holly Holm, a former champion at that weight class, that she can go down there and contend for a title, that maybe she likes the way she matches up with a Valentina Shevchenko or an Amanda Nunes or, I don't know, something like that. She probably just likes her chances. I mean, just think about it. What would it take for you as a champion to abdicate your title and avoid a fight to go to another weight class? Probably a number of things in both directions. Some of the things that she stated about her not wanting to fight Cyborg plays a role, but also probably, an ability to get a big check or, reasonably sized check at bantamweight and some kind of, I think, somewhat misguided belief that she can, contend for a title down there. But I don't know what else it could be. It has to be an incredibly powerful motivator because you never see it otherwise, to just walk away from a title that you just got because you don't like the number one contender. That is, it's hard to understand because it is absolutely, not certainly in combat sports, but in the UFC, basically without precedent.
And the other interesting thing is that according to Germaine, the UFC were aware from the beginning she always planned on going back down to 135 after the Holly Holm fight, which kind of begs the question of why even fight for the belt if you're not going to stick around in the division? Do you buy into this whole thing about the UFC knowing and being aware of Germaine's plans?
There's probably some truth to that. I mean, from what I understand, and I've not had complete conversations with either side. Certainly on Germaine's side, I've had conversations with nobody. I hear things about what the UFC was trying to do and what they wanted to do. My understanding is there might be some validity to that she had designs about going back to 135, but not immediately. Not that she would win the title and then say, well, Holm should get a rematch. No one asked for that. And then to say, well, I'm having some issues. And then to come out and say, I'm just not going to fight Cyborg. I don't think they ever saw that coming. Who could? That she had designs to go back there eventually, or even during the course of her title reign, if a featherweight fight didn't materialize, it's not a big sacrifice to go to 135. But this idea that I was going to win the title and just walk away to begin with, that seems to me, not a fabrication exactly, but a not an accurate representation of the timeline.
So just to recap this whole division, first the UFC forced Cyborg to cut a lot of weight. Then they finally make the featherweight division, seemingly reluctantly. Then Cyborg doesn't even end up being the part of the inaugural title fight. The fight goes on to be unfortunately controversial and rather lackluster. And then after all that, the featherweight champion is basically relinquishing the title and not fighting the one person that the division was built around. What do you, Luke, make of the UFC's featherweight division attempt so far? And what do you think the solution is to save it and get it back on track? Is there something that can be done in the immediate future?
Look. I mean, what a goat rope. I don't know what the translation would be, but like in American English, that means something like an absolute disaster of, a mix between bad luck and just complete fuck up. I mean, it's somewhere, it's it's a salad with those two ingredients, right? And you can't tell where one begins and the other ends. It's something like that. But look, here's the truth about it. I think the UFC did try and earnestly to get this going and made a lot of mistakes. And I do think, Holly Holm was in it to win it one way or the other. And, de Randamie up until recently certainly appeared that way too. There was some reasons to make the decisions that they made. And it's always easy as a critic to say negative things. And it's always easy to look at it from the outside and say things should have been differently. Here's what I know. Cyborg bears some responsibility here for the way in which she is complicit in the creation of the 135 division and her own weight management issues, and certainly the USADA issues. Even though she was exonerated, there could have been a better management of that whole process as well. There's a lot. It's not really that the UFC has some responsibility here. All these actors have not done their job. Neither Germaine de Randamie, not Cyborg, not the UFC. The good news is, going forward, I feel like we can just strip away this pretension. I don't really think Megan Anderson, to be quite honest, should be fighting Cyborg. I think she's still developing her skills and needs about a year or two more to get there. But if they need to just make this division to get it going or whatever, do it. Put Cyborg in a title fight and then just do what Invicta does. Just find women who will fight her and have her fight those ladies. It's really quite as simple as that. Make the Zingano fight or what just find something to do. If it's just the Cyborg division, that's really quite all right. We don't have to pretend for it to be something it's not. The UFC needs 20 to 25 at a bare minimum of women to make a division. They don't have that. So why try to pretend otherwise? Just make it the Cyborg division, call it women's 145, and go from there.
Yeah, it's a baffling situation, but maybe that will be the only way to sort of fix things. Anyway, look, let's look forward towards UFC 212 because we're excited to sort of hear some of your thoughts about this card. Now, looking at the card as it is currently, how are you feeling about it as a whole? Do you think it's worth the pay-per-view price tag and the numbered event status?
Whenever someone asks me, is it worth it, I always have a hard time answering that question. One, because I have my own calculation. Like, what does that mean? Is it worth it? Like, okay, does it have requisite star power? Okay, well, for who? For you, for me, for the average casual audience. I think the more precise question in this particular context is, what is going to be, do you think, the general response to the card? Because to me, I have a friend coming over. That makes it worth it to buy. The main event makes it worth it to buy. As a general consumer response, however, I think it will be probably pretty poor. No Anderson Silva on this, and even if there was, his star has faded a little bit. Vitor Belfort's on there. That helps, but that's bigger for Brazil than it is for America. Claudia Gadelha is not a nobody, but she's not a pay-per-view star. Eric Silva, Borrachinha, same kind of thing. So it's got a lot of redeeming value as a card with good fights, but it's very low in star power, and as a consequence, I think it will do mediocre to bad on pay-per-view.
Main event is obviously the biggest fight that everybody's intrigued by, but are there any other fights or fight that stands out to you as one that you're looking forward to? Maybe any fights that people are sleeping on?
Ooh, yes, a couple of them. I'm curious to see how Borrachinha does against, I always mispronounce his name, Bangbos.
I always just think it as well. I'm not going to help you. Bamboo.
I know. I always feel like I'm saying the Bang Bus, which I don't mean to be disparaging about his last name. I just can't get it right. That one's obviously pretty good. Borrachinha looks like $1 million, so we'll see what kind of prospect he is. But the one I'm really looking forward to be honest, except in addition to the retirement fight of Vitor Belfort, or the seeming retirement fight anyway, I'm looking forward to Shootface versus Eric Spicely. Got to be honest. For us in America, free on Fox Sports 1, part of the prelim card. Shootface down an American top team at middleweight. He's had some ups and downs, but I still think he's a hell of a grappler. Eric Spicely has gotten incredibly better. And these two guys, I suspect, are maybe they'll slug it out. If they do, Shootface is game. And on the ground, there could be some really great jiu-jitsu here. So you never know exactly, but I've got my eye on that one.
Oh, very nice. I think a lot of other people do as well. Now, what do you think about Marlon Moraes getting Raphael Assuncao in his UFC debut? The UFC obviously rarely give favorable matchups to highly touted signees and champions coming in from other organizations. And even though Marlon's the betting favorite, what do you think about Assuncao as his first opponent?
I like Assuncao's chances here, to be honest. I think he's super talented. That long layoff really hurt him, but he has a very matured skill set, vicious on the ground, hard to hit. He used to be quite hittable. That was one of his bigger problems. It's a lot more of a problem, a lot less of a problem now, more of a problem for his opponents. He's good everywhere, and he's been fighting way tougher guys. Marlon Moraes, I think, is deserving of all the praise he gets, but there are still some unresolved questions about his upside. Not the same with Assuncao. So I'm not declaring this is Assuncao's fight to lose, but if he goes in there and emerges victorious, that should not be surprising to anyone. He's one of these guys who has no star power, virtually none, and is just as good as the guys who do. Which puts him in an interesting place where people will oftentimes, as a consequence, they won't take their chances as seriously. I've seen this over the years in MMA all the time. Sometimes these betting odds and these prognostications can be loosely tied to a degree anyway, of someone's popularity. That's a big mistake to do that against someone like as good as Raphael Assuncao.
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting fight. I want to ask you about, obviously, Vitor Belfort, and like you mentioned, the retirement fight, but not quite retirement fight. Obviously, his sharp decline has been pretty evident for a long time now. But what do you think about Nate Marquardt being his final UFC opponent? Do you think Nate is the right guy? Should the UFC maybe have used Vitor to build a rising star on his way out? What do you think?
I guess, man, I didn't want to see him in the UFC at all, to be honest. I mean, Nate Marquardt hasn't put 2 wins together since 2011 and 12, when he beat Dan Miller and Tyron Woodley first in UFC and then Strikeforce. That's how long it's been. I wouldn't, and this was, of course, at welterweight. That's the last time he put 2 wins together. And since then, he's had 3 losses in a row in one stint and then 2 losses in a row in another. He's sprinkled in some victories to remain around. I mean, it meets what Vitor wants. Against an American versus another Brazilian, so they can beat up on the American and everyone will go crazy, right? They love that down in Brazil. It's just part of the game. It is, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You have to, or Australian, or, a Canadian, just, a gringo. They want to see the gringo get his comeuppance. So This certainly provides an opportunity for that. They're both older. I think in that sense, okay. They're both a little shop worn. In that sense, okay. So on paper, there are reasons why you would make the fight. It's just that, you just don't want to see it at all. I don't need to see these guys fight anymore. But I guess so long as there's a market and there's an athletic commission willing to sanction it, my revulsion for this kind of thing seems about the most irrelevant concern imaginable.
And I mean, Vitor, he's had an incredibly accomplished career in MMA, but the last few years have been filled with a bit of controversy and questionable PR decisions. What do you think Vitor's legacy will be in the sport when he sort of decides to hang up the gloves? And how do you think he'll be remembered by UFC fans?
Yeah, well, let's see what happens if he goes to Bellator. He even said recently he's not ruling out a continued UFC run, but let's assume this is the end, like you noted, and it's a reasonable way to think about it. I think, I'll be honest, there's no way to think about Vitor without thinking about some of the TRT issues, ignoring an athletic commission to go fight in England, testing positive several times for performance-enhancing drugs. It's not possible to have a honest and forthright conversation about his career without mentioning these things. And I think that will play a factor. But I have to say, and I know this might make some people who are the most, the biggest anti-doping zealots don't want to admit this, but it won't define his legacy. It really won't. The fact that the guy was a pioneer and a Carlson Gracie black belt or junior black belt, the fact that the guy was out there winning titles with the UFC, the fact that he had success late in life and was this pioneer for Brazil and was the biggest star out of Brazilian MMA when Brazilian MMA before it was hot and even when it was hot, that this guy was able to cross over into the mainstream and do all manner of things for the UFC, for Brazil, for mixed martial arts, was there at the biggest time of Pride, was there at the biggest time of UFC. This is what will define him over time. Yes, of course, like I mentioned, that portion of his PED use will forever remain a part of the conversation. It just won't be the conversation. It will be that this is probably one of the most important figures in the history of Brazilian MMA in the modern era.
I think that's very well put. And while we're talking about legacies and how certain things affect people's legacies, a man who's been brought up a lot recently has obviously been Demetrious Johnson, taking a bit of a sidestep away from UFC 212 for a second. I'm curious, where do you stand on this potential TJ Dillashaw versus Demetrious Johnson fight? Do you think it makes sense? Has TJ earned the right to go straight into a title fight if he's cutting the weight to 125? And what do you think of Demetrious Johnson's hesitation, Luke?
Yeah, even today, apparently Cody Garbrandt coming out and saying he wants a fight with Demetrious Johnson. So it's got to be good to be in demand, huh? Nothing wrong with that, I guess. Finally, people are out there begging for fights with this guy and calling them super fights. That feels like a bit of a turnaround. They want some of the, how has Demetrious Johnson improved his name? He's done it with fighting accomplishment over time, not much like Conor. Well, Conor's done that too. I don't mean to disparage him. I mean, Conor, of course, compliments it with bombast and size and spectacle. He hasn't done any of that. But he's done enough of the accomplishment side to now be a target of acquisition for people who want that scalp. So that's something to be said there. I mean, look, if someone asked you, hey, what do you think TJ versus DJ? Is that a cool fight? Of course. Of course. How is it not a cool fight? How would it not be a good fight? But for me, and again, I won't cry if they make it, but for me, I don't know about you guys, man. I'm a little apprehensive about it because I really think what's driving it is, number one, it would create complications at bantamweight if he loses or if he wins. Either way, it could potentially create complications. He still has that fight looming with Garbrandt. But for me, more than that, it's like it's a down year, man. It's just a down year. This is a boom and bust sport. And 2016 was great. 2017 is not going to be great. When it's over, it's not going to be a great year. It doesn't matter what happens the rest of the year on out. There'll be good fights, but it's not a big year for the sport. And 2018 might be the exact same way. This is just how the cookie crumbles. You have to ride it out a little bit. And so what I feel like fans are doing is and I understand it completely, man, they're dying for a big fight. They're dying for something different, new, a twist, something interesting, which is a totally rational, understandable way to go through that. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't create problems whenever you do something like this. Every time they have a guy jump the queue from another division to come down who hasn't worked in that division in some capacity, they end up creating an interim title after the fact because it always causes problems. This is not the time for that. Demetrious Johnson has no incentive to take it either. So I understand the impulse. I think it's a little bit of throwing the baby out with the bathwater because everyone is so desperate for something better than what we have.
I think it's a good point when you look at sort of the long-term effects that it might have and some of the negative ones. There's certainly a really good argument. I think you present a really good point for why this fight shouldn't happen. But what do you think about this notion that a lot of people are saying basically TJ hasn't earned the right, if he was to say drop down, if he was to cut the weight, make that sacrifice, that somehow, Ray Borg, because he's already been fighting the division, he deserves it more. And I think a lot of people are sort of saying, well, why should TJ fight a bigger guy when in fact, well, he wouldn't be fighting a bigger guy. He's not moving up for a super fight. Someone is coming down to his division. And how does DJ in that sense sort of turn down that fight and say, no, even though someone's coming down to my division, I won't take that fight?
So this is the interesting part about it. I mean, he needs an incentive to do it, right? Because if you're coming down and you haven't worked through the contendership meritocracy, you don't have a claim on it, even if the fight sounds interesting. You have to present something so unique and so interesting that there's a reason to go outside of that contendership pool and say, okay, this is the fight we'll make. And in this particular context, you're right. Like it seems quite interesting. He's, I was there, for example, when DJ fought Dominic Cruz. That was in my hometown of Washington, D.C. at the Verizon Center. And the clear takeaway for me from that fight was DJ is not outmatched by Cruz technique-wise. Just the size was too much. And now you're saying, I think quite rightly, some of those concerns could be assuaged if he comes down to 125. But the fact of the matter is this. We have to get comfortable with it. And this is what I was referring to a little bit earlier with the de Randamie stuff. Fighters are going to make calculations about what fights they are and aren't going to take. And it's not a function of being scared or not. This is what I was discussing earlier. And again, I don't know if de Randamie is scared. But in this particular case with DJ, he's about to break the record. Ray Borg is a guy who is a flyweight contender. I'm not saying he's the most amazing flyweight contender in terms of a resume that I've ever seen, but he has won 5 of his last 6. This is the guy. If you're Demetrious Johnson, and the challenge is, at least in the case of TJ, arguably greater, but the payout is not. It's not a money fight. It would be more than it would be with Ray Borg, but probably marginally so. What incentive did you possibly have to take that? You have no incentive whatsoever. The guy doesn't have a claim on meritocracy, and he doesn't have a claim on money. So what claim does he have? That on paper it sounds interesting? I agree. But if you're Demetrious Johnson, you got to give him a reason to take that fight. He doesn't have it.
And it's just interesting how you mentioned just the landscape that we're looking at when it comes to MMA. I mean, I want to go back to UFC 212 in just a second and get your thoughts on the main event. But GSP just had an appearance on the MMA Hour and did a great interview with Ariel, but mentioned that if he does lose his return fight in the UFC, he'd be looking to retire. I guess some fans are a little bit frustrated with the way these big money fights are coming together, fighters just coming in. Sometimes it's just kind of clear that it's for the money and they're not really sticking around. What did you make of GSP's comments, or those comments that he made to Ariel about his future being uncertain if he loses his first return fight?
And then just goes back to retirement, you mean?
Yeah.
Is he putting too much pressure on himself? I mean, he's been away for like 3 and something years. If he comes back and he's sort of hinging the rest of his career on one fight, is that realistic?
Well, that's interesting. Well, you know what's funny? I spoke to Dan Hardy today, and he told me the exact same thing about himself. He goes, when we asked him, what weight are you going to come back at and what time? And, does it have to be the UK or all these conditions? Mm-hmm. And he said he had 3 fights left on his deal, but there's no way he'd take more than 1. She's just like, he's basically, I'm done. There's other things I got going on. I just want the 1. I just want the 1 more. Now, GSP sounds like he's a little bit more committed than that, meaning if you won and there was another additional level of glory potentially attainable, what have you got to lose at that point? So he's in a bit of a different space. But all these guys, that not only know they're working on borrowed time, but they have a borrowed commitment. I think the reality is St-Pierre can work up a commitment to train and compete at this level only insofar as he has any ability to derive interest in doing so. But when these guys are out there in their primes, they're not merely physically in their prime, but they're mentally in a space where they can drive themselves to the point the average person couldn't. They're literally like insane temporarily. They're temporarily insane with how committed they are. And when you lose that, you can only manufacture it for a very short amount of time. And they know that, and they know the consequences of not having that and how dire they can be. So to me, it's like, there's a question of, hinging his career. That might just be salesmanship. I don't really think that. I think what it more just comes down to is they know they can work up just enough to have one last sprint to the finish line, and then that's it. And they just want to see what they can get out of it. I don't think that either Hardy or GSP in their real heart of hearts believes, win or lose, this has some major implications for their historical review.
Interesting. And I'll be very curious to check out that Dan Hardy interview. I'm sure it's going to be on your YouTube channel, Luke. We appreciate the time you're giving us. Just quickly, if we can squeeze it in, we want to quickly talk about obviously the main event of UFC 212, Max Holloway versus Jose Aldo. Considering that McGregor is incredibly unlikely to ever return to 145 in the UFC, Luke, do you think that we're essentially seeing contests between the 2 best featherweights in the world here?
I certainly do. I was talking about this on Twitter earlier today. I absolutely love this fight. I think any real fight fan does. And I'm not saying that come Sunday morning, everyone and their brother will forget about Conor McGregor. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is there's a lot of reasons to like Holloway versus Aldo. And one of the best ones is, especially if Holloway wins, a little bit more difficult if Aldo wins. But even then, I feel like it's not the closing of the book on McGregor's run at featherweight, but rather it's the cleaning up. It's a big step towards cleaning up some of the complications that were created as a consequence of his win and abdication, or stripping of the title, however you want to put it. Look. The thing is, if you're going to do a super fight, have a good reason. To me, McGregor versus Alvarez jumping up like that made all the sense in the world because there's incredible historical and financial returns that were available. But sometimes there's going to be a cost to pay, and there was a big cost for featherweight. It created a lot of problems at the top. It created a lot of dissension in the ranks. There is a tax you have to pay. To me, this is some of those bigger end of the bills being paid, unifying the titles, having young challenge old, institutional power versus upstart. It just feels like the division is taking a big step towards moving on, which is what it needs and those athletes deserve.
It seems like it's going to be a bit of a technical battle on the feed, but what would you say each man has to do in order to secure the win this coming weekend, Luke?
Man. For Aldo, it's, I think, about the way, kind of similar to how he beat Edgar, using his athletic gifts and quickness to get around, absolutely shutting down any hope of the takedown, using leg kicks as he can open up, right, to slow down the approach of Holloway. For Holloway, it's the exact opposite. He needs to get in his face, avoid being murdered at boxing or kickboxing range, and make Aldo work. Make him work. Get in his face. Back him up. Control and cut off the cage. Really got to make him react to your offense and make him suffer physically so that you can't beat Aldo in those first 3 rounds unless you're Conor McGregor. But in the 4th and 5th, he has shown some historical vulnerability. That's also coincidentally when Holloway is able to step on the gas. I think he should put some investments in those first 3 rounds and then do exactly that later on in the championship portion of that fight.
All right, well, look, we got one more question, Luke, so we'll make it a good one. Obviously, we've seen Jose Aldo beat majority of the division, and Max Holloway sort of come up the other side and beaten most of the division. You can make a clear argument that if Holloway wins, you make that Frankie Edgar fight. If Aldo wins, it's a little bit of a mystery of what happens. What do you think is best for business, Aldo winning or Max winning?
1,000% Max winning. It's not even just best for business, just best for divisional sanity. Aldo is like, it sounds like we're just trying to take out yesterday's trash, and it almost felt like what the UFC was doing with Edgar versus Rodriguez, and that blew up in their face, and maybe this one will as well, although it's a little bit different because Holloway is a very, very deserving contender, whether he'd be an interim champ or not. But no doubt about it, the amount of opportunity it creates if Holloway wins, and let's say he wins handily as well, man, it creates that Edgar fight. You can have Lamas come through the ranks, Cub Swanson can get a rematch, and I'm not saying these are the most, oh my God, amazing fights ever. They would sell a gazillion pay-per-view buys. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it would put the division back in order. When a division's got a flow and the champion's defending against contenders and new contenders are emerging and everything in the machine is kind of working, that's what you want to see. And when you do these super fights and guys leave, all of that gets jacked up. This, as I mentioned before, irons out that process. And to your point, if Holloway wins, man, that would be great for featherweight.
I agree fully. Anyway, guys, he'll be watching, obviously, the fights UFC 212, a great follow on Twitter. You can catch him Monday through to Friday, the Luke Thomas Show on Sirius XM Rush 93, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and, of course, Monday Morning Analyst and the Promotional Malpractice live chat. Luke, it is always a pleasure chatting to you and gaining your insights, so thank you so much for taking the time and chatting with us.
Anytime, guys. Thank you for having me.
This is Don Fry, and you're listening to Submission Radio. You touch that dial and I'll kill you.
What's up, fight fans? I'm the forward-facing camera you weren't expecting, so you look like shit of mixed martial arts, Tommy Toehold! And UFC 212 is this weekend, and I am fucking psyched! Shut your fucking mouth! Conor McGregor? You're not excited about shit. What are you talking about? The top two featherweights in the division are fighting for— Top two featherweights? How the fuck are they gonna fight for a title that I never lost? Yeah, but you haven't defended it yet. Does that change the fact that I KO'd Jose faster than most people can tie their shoes? Does that change the fact that I beat Max Holloway with a knee that exploded in the first round? I beat Max so bad he went on a fucking 10-fight win streak after I beat him. I changed his whole boom life. He should be thanking me. None of these motherfuckers are on the same level as me. Fuck a belt, who needs a belt? I know I'm the best. UFC 212 should be called Conor Scraps. These motherfuckers are lucky I don't come back and bury them both. Hey bro, how you say these things about UFC 212, bro? They're gonna call it Vitor's retirement, okay? This the last time people gonna see Vitor in the cage, bro. Vitor, I thought you said you were still planning on fighting after this fight. Yeah, bro, but there already been 3 or 4 versions of Vitor, okay, bro? There been a lot of different Vitors. There been young Vitor, there been skinny Vitor, there been TRT Tor, there been old man Vitor, and now I'm gonna reach my final form, bro. What's that? Hobo Vitor, bro. I'm gonna be a Hobot next, okay? There are no rules against being a Hobot. I look it up. Hobo Vitor gonna spinning head kick everybody so hard. I'm pretty sure that's illegal too. I'm Tommy Toehold. UFC 212 is gonna feature a robot Vitor Belfort, and that's about all you need to know. Fun times. Back to you guys.
Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Demetrious Johnson, the UFC flyweight champion of the world, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
All right, guys, our next guest needs no formal introduction. Recently kicking off his own YouTube channel featuring his awesome breakdowns, exciting fighter interviews, and lots more. It's a pleasure to welcome him back to dissect UFC 212. Robin Black, welcome back to Submission Radio. How you going today?
Hey, I'm doing good, guys. I always like hanging with you guys.
Excellent.
Australians are kind of like Canadians. Like I relate to you weirdos.
Yeah. Well, we've heard Australia been described as hot Canada, so we like that. We take it as a compliment because Canada's awesome. We're not gonna lie, Robin. We've enjoyed a lot of your content on your YouTube channel. It's really kicked off. It's really booming at the moment. A lot of innovative segments such as hotel hangouts, shuttle wrap-ups, lots more. A lot of things that make us jealous that we're over here in hot Canada instead of over there in on the action. How have you enjoyed doing the whole YouTube thing and having the freedom to do whatever you like?
Yeah, it's pretty cool, man. Like, creativity is one of those things that when you kind of let it out and just sort of don't think before you act. I mean, these days you can do literally whatever you want, and the audience and the market will decide whether or not it's good. And so when I've got down to I got to UFC 210 and 211, and while I was there, I literally just thought, well, what would I like to do? And I realized that a lot of the things from, in TV, there are certain outlines and formulas that are followed. Some of them are because there were commercials. Some of them are because 1 hour blocks are easier to sell advertising. Like there's some very structural things that you don't have to address. Like you don't have to do weird opens. You don't have to come back from commercials. You don't need time limits. You don't need any of those things. You can just hang out and have brunch with Jorge Masvidal, or you can sit in a bar and have a beer, and to me, that's a lot more interesting. Like I've never been an interviewer. I've never been a journalist. I know these people. I have a different relationship with them, I think, than a lot. So if I just get to hang out and chat with them, that's what I do when there's no camera around. Like most of those conversations are the exact conversations I have with Mark Henry or with, Jorge or with Mike Brown or any. These are just the conversations I normally have on Fight Week. So we just put a camera on it.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, people have seen it through a lot of the stuff that you've done through Fight Network. But I think because you've got your own YouTube channel, it's almost like you get an opportunity. Well, I've noticed that you've got an opportunity to even be more creative and sort of put more self of you out there, which I think is really cool about the YouTube channel. And everybody needs to subscribe to it. But just on the Fight Network, I mean, I think a lot of fans listening to this are wondering sort of what happened with that whole thing. I know they watched you on the Fight Network for quite a while. Why did they sort of make a change in the direction, and how did your relationship with them sort of go separate ways?
Yeah, it's really hard to say. Like I have, as soon as I was suddenly a free agent, people offer you jobs if you're lucky, and I was, and I feel very, very thankful and fortunate. And other people have meetings with you, and you have meetings with people. That seems to be. I mean, I love what I do. I'm obsessed with what I do. I can't live without doing what I do. So I realized very quickly, I had to see what was up. Now I figured a YouTube channel would just allow me to do fight stuff, but I still have to pay my bills. And I was not opposed to getting a real job as long as I could still talk about fighting and travel around. But I was very fortunate. I got offered a lot of commentary gigs, and I did a contract with a company out of South Korea called Monster Zim, and I've been doing something with them every month. I'm going to New York next week for them. I was just in Seoul, Korea, and I've got, so I've got a lot of cool work that paid the bills and gave me the space to do the YouTube channel. But all these meetings and conversations, you do get a lot of insight into the shifts of what's happening in media. And like most things, I kind of compare it to the martial arts. So you see a shift. Jose Aldo used to fight as a pressure fighter, very much a pressure fighter, forward pressure, left hook, low kick, pressure guys, make them back up. And Conor McGregor worked around that, disrupted that, and then Aldo changed. And you can see the same patterns in just about anything. Television, there's no secret, is on a downswing. There's less advertising in television. There's less money in it. There's less subscribers, as people are listening to shows like this and doing things like watching my YouTube channel and getting on Netflix. And all of these things mean people watch TV less. So as that's going down, then web-based things are going up. And when that's happening, an industry on its way down, presuming that the 20 different companies that we see that are all doing that. Yes, I'd rather use ESPN as an example than my former employer, because I don't want to, I got lots of friends there and stuff, and I still love the CEO. So we use ESPN as an example. They're just losing a lot of money, and so they have to cut a lot. And generally, there is a fight to figure out what to cut. When you cut digital and when you cut people that have a following, you worry for ESPN or any of these companies that they're cutting their future, but they got to survive. So, I learned a lot about business, and I learned a lot about change, and I learned a lot about waves, like the wave of one thing ends and the wave of the next thing begins. And I've been very, very fortunate. The timing actually is great. I think if it was 5 or 6 or 8 more months till they cut our department, I don't think I'd have been in as good of a position to be on the next wave like I already seem to be. So I feel very fortunate. The timing was really good in retrospect.
I mean, it's good that it worked out that way, and it's kind of a bummer because you and Ramdie and you guys were very synonymous with the Fight Network, and you go and you look at a lot of the comments on their YouTube channel and people just talking about you guys and, hey, where's Robin, where's John Ramdie, why'd you guys, why aren't they here anymore? So it's a bit of a bummer, but obviously we wish Fight Network nothing but the best, and we're happy to see that you're booming and you've got other things going on in your park at the moment. You've basically got this opportunity where Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series, that's debuted on Fight Park. past, and that's booming at the moment. A lot of positive reviews, a lot of positive feedback, and there's exciting things happening, and you might be on that. Tell us about that, Robin.
Yeah, I mean, their first live show is, I believe, July 16th, and the last round of final auditions is June 10th, and I'm one of them.
Wow.
And, a lot of people in this situation, I think, and there are others. I don't know who they are, but there are others.
See, you don't know your competition. You don't know who you're competing against in the auditions.
Yeah, and the truth is, it doesn't matter. I mean, I'll see, I guess, some of them on the day I'm there, maybe, but I know they're mostly UFC fighters. It's the color commentary role that I'm trying out for. I think a lot of people would probably not talk about this, feeling that they jinx it. But for me, I'd rather, I'm trying to share the process of my preparation, and it's a big thing to have a job that is essentially your dream job, and this is. I've said publicly for a decade that when I started out, before my very first fight, my goal was to commentate the UFC. 10 years ago, I set out with that goal. And now I have a final audition for the chance to do that. That's pressure. That's heavy. That's a heavy, heavy fucking truth that you go in and carry that. I think I deal with that better talking it out, talking to David Mullins, my consultant, my combat sports psychology consultant, and I talked to him about it, and then kind of talking it out on my YouTube channel on Fighting is About Fighting. I'm talking about the process of getting ready and study and a performance coach and how meditation is helping me. I mean, an audition is like a fight. You're not going to get kicked in the head, but you're asking yourself to perform at your very, very best with a lot on the line. I'll do that better if I talk about it with friends, and I talk about it with friends on my YouTube channel, but I'm going in there to get it. I mean, I've spent the last 9 years preparing for this. I've commentated 400 shows. Most of them are shows right below the UFC, right on that edge where the fighter who wins changes his life. He moves on to a new chapter of his life. And the dream that these fighters carry and the urgency and the visceral nature that they're fighting with, I've commentated 400 shows like that, 4,000 fights. So I'm ready to do it, but I have to go in there and perform. And so I'm going to go. I intend to go get that job. If I fail, I'll go back in 6 months. If I fail again, I'll go back in a year. I'll keep getting better every day. And I'm going to commentate the UFC at some point. And I'm coming in there ready to get this job.
And we're going to get into UFC 212 in just a second. But I'm just curious, Robert. I mean, you have a lot of interesting theories and philosophies. A lot of successful people talk about the power of positivity. You've got the book The Secret that's out in the video. You sort of, if you're positive, if you believe in stuff, good things happen to you. Are you of that mindset? Do you believe in the power of positivity? Is that something that you use to prepare for roles and auditions like this?
I don't know. Not in that sense. Perspective is big. I mean, you have to have an honest perspective. The truth of the matter is, the real truth, the only thing that matters is that I earned this. I earned this spot. 4,000 fights got me here. And the thousands of preparations I did before that, the 9 fights that I got in, that I trained, the failures, the setbacks, people making fun of me, other people supporting me, every single interview that I did, the thousands and thousands of times I was on Fight Network. All that shit is real. Positive thinking is just positive thinking. Positive thinking without that stuff would be useless. Somebody was chatting with me on Twitter today, and they were like, somebody else should get a chance. I'm like, there's no such thing as chance. Those shows, most of them at first I did for free. I chased them. I spent my own money to do it. I had a part-time job to chase that down. My 200 breakdowns averaged about 30 hours each. That's 6,000 hours of work. I've done the fucking work. So the confidence or the positivity that I go in there is a result of the work. If you offered me this position 3 or 4 years ago, where I only had 150 shows and I'd only done 2,000 2,000 broadcasts, or 220 live weigh-ins and so forth, I wouldn't have been able to get it. I wouldn't have been certain that I had the real skills to do it. The truth is, none of that shit matters except the work. The work is easier to do if you're positive. The work is easier to... Patience and positivity will help you do the work. But, the work is the only thing that matters. And but it's a little easier to do, if you're positive about it. I mean, positivity is going to help you. The positive nature also that's going to help is if I've done everything humanly possible, including the last 9 years and everything I do from this moment until the moment I do that audition and don't get it, I'll be down because that would be normal, but because this means a lot to me. But I'll be positive as I retool and try it again and again and again. And that's where positivity matters. But positivity without the work is not worth anything. The secret is bullshit. The secret is absolute bullshit. Sitting around hoping that the universe will bring you something you think about. You have to think about it, be positive about it, and then work your fucking ass off for years about it. If you do that, then it'll work.
I agree with you 100%. It's funny because Conor McGregor's a big advocate of the secret, and I get it. There's a lot of people who, put pictures up of Ferraris and things like that in their desk, but the thing about Conor McGregor is he wasn't just a secret. He wasn't sitting around eating chips going, I'll be a UFC fighter and I'll be this and that. I mean, obviously he worked really hard, and anybody who's ever achieved anything is, it's probably like 96% hard work and then maybe 4% a little bit of luck and being there in the right place and the right time. But hey, I hope next time you're on the program, Robin, we'll be introducing you as the new UFC commentator, because that shit would be really exciting. And maybe if you haven't already planned it, maybe you do sort of like a backstage sort of like vlogging when you're actually doing the audition. But let's talk about UFC 212 before we talk about this throughout the whole interview. Obviously, a big UFC pay-per-view coming at the fans, and that's UFC 212. Exciting UFC debut that a lot of people are looking forward to and have been for a long time. We're, of course, talking about World Series of Fighting bantamweight champion Marlon Moraes. He'll be getting a really tough welcome into the division with Raphael Assuncao, and Marlon's currently on an amazing 13-fight win streak, but Assuncao's a really stiff test for anybody, and the UFC certainly aren't giving him an easy fight. What do you think about Assuncao as Marlon's debut opponent? Should they maybe have given him somebody easier to get his feet wet, or do you like this matchup?
I spoke to Mark Henry about Marlon, and I'm seeing Mark Henry on the 6th, a couple days after this fight. And this is what they wanted. They wanted the top guy that they could possibly get in the division. TJ, Assuncao, whatever they could get. This is what they wanted. So that's cool. I mean, that says something about Marlon, and it says something about Mark, and it says something about their team. I mean, he goes in and he fights Frankie Edgar every day. Not every day, but he goes in and fights Frankie Edgar many Thursdays. You know what I mean? And he's ready. And if he isn't, he'd like to know it. He'd like to know right away. But, you're surrounded by people who know the level. I like the test for him because Assuncao's the biggest challenge with him is he's really, really good at everything. He's not going to make any errors, and there's going to be no glaring weakness or no mistake. Like a lot of the time at the not quite at the top level, if one guy makes a mistake and the other guy's ready when he makes it, that's the end of the fight, or it's a big swing in position and somebody's able to take over. So if you're Marlon Moraes and you're facing somebody a little bit lower, you're going to be sitting there ready to either wait for them to make a mistake or, more likely in his case, force them to make a mistake. When they do, you'll be on their back or you'll be hurting them really badly or changing the fight. Assuncao's not going to make that mistake. So you have to win every little battle. You have to win the hand battle. You have to win at every position. You go, and that's the scary and crazy part at the highest level, is you see a guy and you pick any moment in a fight. Let's say Assuncao is going to pass Marlon's guard. There's a battle there that neither guy will give up. Every single moment of every single fight is a battle that you have to fight and force yourself to win, and it'll go back and forth with these guys. I think if it was also 25 minutes, that would be exciting because Marlon's at least done it with Josh Hill before, and he would be wanting that. And he's been training for 25-minute fights, so I think that'll be interesting too. He'll probably be really, really pushing it early because he knows it's only 15. But I love the fight. I love how ballsy Marlon and Mark and their whole team is.
Yeah, it's going to be really exciting. And because we don't have that much time with you, Robin, we want to jump up the card to the big fight, the retirement fight, Vitor Belfort's quote-unquote last retirement fight against Nate Marquardt. Now, two legends are going up against each other. They represent many eras in MMA. Vitor's 40, Nate's 38. Both had amazing moments in their career. But what do you think about Nate being Vitor's final UFC opponent, and what do you think about this matchup?
It's perfect. I really literally think, and I'm not a big not a big debater with the matchups. It's like, hey, whoever you're going to put in there, it's either a big test for somebody, or it's an easy fight for someone, or it's well matched, or I don't really care about how they look in the rankings or any of those things. But sometimes it's just perfect. Like, and this is really perfect. If you told me that Nate Marquardt was having his last fight, I would say that makes sense. If you were telling me Vitor Belfort is having his last fight for real, I'd say that makes sense. And it's a perfect fight between two guys. And listen, when I talk about the old days, the dark days of steroids and different bending of rules and stuff, I do it with the full knowledge that these guys used to have to travel to countries where they didn't know what the other guy was on, and it was a time of testing and trying these things. There weren't athletic commissions and stuff. So most of the old guys that are still around at one time or another have had to take something, which these days with USADA is really hard on their bodies. You know what I mean? The end up, how they had to pay for whatever they did, and both guys have been on, quote, TRT, and both guys have been over the line on TRT before, but in all likelihood it is due to a unregulated Wild West of a past. And when guys had to go through that, and they did, quote, have to, because that was how the Wild West was played, it damages their endocrine systems. It makes it hard for them to perform athletically. And so for them to fight each other at this stage of their career, this age, with the amount of miles they have, not only on their hormones, but on their bodies and on all of them, I just think it's a perfect fight. And I think however it goes down, it's really a perfect fight for both of them.
I think you made a lot of good points and sold it well. A lot of people here predicting a big knockout from Vitor Belfort, but do you think we'll see Nate potentially spoil Vitor's retirement by maybe turning this into a wrestling match if people sort of counted Nate out a little too early here, Robin? What do you think?
Yeah, I think, hey, Vitor in Brazil, he's it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, and over the last few years, trying to get Vitor to not blitz for the first half of the first round, that's hard because sometimes he wins, and when he doesn't, he loses. But at least you know what you're going to get. And they've tried to pull those reins back and shape them different. And if Vitor really has been training in Montreal with Faraz for any length of time, Faraz might be inclined to have him get behind the jab or something. And Faraz knows Nate. But if it's me and it's Vitor's last fight and it's in Brazil, let the thoroughbred run and just let him go for broke in the first half of the first round. The issue with that is it's a dice roll, and Marquardt can absolutely catch him charging in, or Marquardt can put him on his ass. So it's a very, very fair and close fight, and it's going to be really interesting to see. I want to see foaming at the mouth Vitor just charge him. Like if it's his last go and he's in Brazil, why not? Do what brung you.
Well, we're on the topic of Vitor. Do you see him going to Bellator after this and fighting guys like Chael Sonnen and Wanderlei Silva, or do you think it's pretty much it after this?
I could see him also going over to Russia or going over to Ryzen or something like that. There's a lot of money to be had over there, and there's big crowds and there's good shows. And right now or even KSW or something like that, I could absolutely see Vitor on a plane flying across an ocean to go have his next fight. No doubt about it.
I think it's in the cards. He's pretty adamant that he's not going to stop fighting despite leaving the UFC. Let's talk about Claudia Gadelha versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz. It's a really highly ranked matchup in the strawweight division. Break this fight down for us, Robin. Do you think that Karolina can use her footwork here to wear out Gadelha, or do you think Gadelha sort of smothers her with her top control?
Yeah, I think that's the big question. I called a lot of Carolina's fights before pre-UFC. When she was in KSW, we called a lot of them for the North American market. Mm-hmm. And she was a very, very, very good grappler and jiu-jitsu player as well. We haven't seen it as much in the UFC, but she very much is. I think the game would be move her feet, defend, punch and back up, low kicks, punches and back up, circle off the cage, try to piece Gadelha up, and definitely win the third round and look to win the second. And if you win the first, great. If not, then you better win the next two. But at the same time, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion either. Kowalkiewicz, if you go back and you look at some of her early KSW work, she's very, very good on the ground, and the game is different for the 115-pound females. You know, the guard still exists, and sweeps are still in play, and it isn't as fully evolved in the same ways. So I give her an advantage, but it's tough to beat Gadelha in Brazil. And as you know, the 3 losses between them has been one woman. So this will be the real test. I mean, there's also a debate often that people will have. It's like, oh, I don't want to see Joseph Benavidez fight Demetrious Johnson again. I do, if he's the second best fighter in the world. You know what I mean? I do. And it's the same with these 2 women. I think the winner of this fight is the best fighter in the world to fight Joanna, and I think that's the right way to approach this fight.
So you're looking at possibly the winner of this getting a title shot over Rose?
Well, I mean, Rose, I could see Rose getting it first because there's all the other elements that we know are at play, popularity and timing and all those things. Rose is very, very skilled. The big thing I'd also love to see. Well, yeah, I mean, I'd love to see Rose in that fight. The issue with Rose has been when she's on, she's very, very on. And when she's not, she's not. And, sometimes it feels like it has a lot to do with the first round and how well she does. And Joanna's a tough first round, and she's not going to break. So it's a harder fight for Rose, but, I'd like to see her fight it anyways. But I think the winner of this fight is the second best female 115 in the world right now.
Yeah. Now, the fight people obviously most looking forward to, Robin, is the clash between Aldo and Holloway. We saw Aldo look amazing against Edgar in his last fight. This is obviously a pivotal fight for both men. In your mind, what does Holloway need to do to figure out the puzzle that is and has been for a long time Jose Aldo?
I'll be honest. I think Holloway's a puzzle, too. I think Aldo has to prove that he can beat this kid, and he has to prove that he can figure him out, and he has to do that fairly early. Like, I think he's got to be able to – here's the one thing with Max Holloway that we can picture him standing in the middle saying throw punches with me. We can picture him standing up to people in exchanges sometimes. But if you look closely, you also can see him against Cub Swanson, against Jeremy Stevens, against Lamas when he felt like it, being really, really hard to hit. And I've been trying to figure out why exactly that is. And I came to the conclusion that although he's 5'11" and he's long, he actually doesn't have long reach. So he's had to figure out how to move his feet really, really well. And I've spent some time talking to his coaches, and they have a different kind of mindset in how his footwork works. Like, he has these moving landmarks of where he wants his front foot, and then the back foot pivots. And it's a very, very interesting game. And it's a game where he can make you miss and then be on you really quickly. And that's not a head movement in his case. That's sliding in and out. And we're seeing a lot of that. I was just in Seoul, Korea about 8 or 9 days ago, and I was, watching Doo-Ho Choi and the Korean Zombie, both 145ers. And the 145 game has started to be about, where you are in conjunction to your opponent's weapons. And both Doo-Ho Choi and the Korean Zombie were so good at sliding out, making you miss, and then hitting you. And even the Korean Zombie students were getting really, really, really good at that. And you're seeing that be a real focus of how the featherweight division is happening. And Jose Aldo's got to land on him. Jose Aldo has to – he is undoubtedly the best featherweight of all time. And he is – if you take any of his great moments, he is brilliant. But this is another thing. And Jose Aldo has to beat it. He has to, have the answers. And they're newer answers. Will he have them? He might. I didn't expect him to have the answers against Frankie Edgar, and he fought an entirely different fight than he had fought in years. In fact, we'd never seen Jose fight the way he fought, drawing so much, backing up, light on his feet, landing hooks and pivoting out. It was a completely different fight. And because of that, we could see a completely different fight against Max Holloway. So it's very, very hard to predict. If I didn't see that Frankie fight, I would be a little more firm in how I can visualize this fight. But it isn't how he fought Frankie. It's the fact that he was capable of such a different performance that makes me think he's capable of that against Max Holloway. But I would not be surprised to see Max Holloway paint the cage in his blood either. I really wouldn't.
I'm interested because you mentioned how sort of Jose kind of has to show that he can beat this kid in Holloway. Who do you think's got more pressure on them going into this fight? Who do you think's got more riding on this title unification fight?
I like the way you're thinking, because the truth is they both do. But the big question and the way that, what you're asking here for me is who's better at it. And Jose Aldo has been carrying that kind of pressure for so many years. And he's the only time we thought, and we don't know what he was thinking, but we think we could feel him feeling it, was against Conor. And then being able to come back and change that and discover that that was not a permanent thing is a great sign for him. But on the other hand, this fucking Max Holloway just steps into these insane pressure fights and looks amazing and wants them and seeks them out, So I don't know the answer to that. I really don't. And I'm dying to know the answer to that, which is why I think this fight is so interesting. I haven't seen Max Holloway really show any mental weakness. I can't think of ever, even with McGregor. And so I don't think he's about to show it now. And then Aldo, on the other hand, has been a mental rock through his entire career with the exception of possibly one night. So we have an amazing – man, I'm getting myself excited.
It's interesting. I almost feel like with Jose Aldo, if he does lose to Max Holloway, people will really bring into question is the Aldo era sort of starting to end, whereas if Max Holloway loses, I kind of think there's less pressure here because he's so young. Like, chances are he'll be fighting for longer than Jose, longer than Frankie, and chances are he'll probably get plenty of opportunities to be a champion in the future. It's interesting, those mind games also that you mentioned, Robin, like we see Max Holloway sort of do something different that we didn't really see in the past, and that's, talking about fighters having, pussyitis, he's calling out Jose Aldo, calling him Jose Waldo. Do you, I mean, we saw, like you mentioned, we saw him sort of, I don't know if I'd say crack, but we saw him affected against Conor McGregor. Do you think any of that has any effect against Jose Aldo? And do you think in some ways maybe going through that with McGregor, they say iron sharpens iron, do you think maybe it's kind of prepared him for the worst in the future and sort of Max's trash talk, it's not really on the level of Conor McGregor's trash talk, and it sort of makes him, I guess, better prepared in this instance?
Yes, I do. I think I agree with exactly what you're saying, and I am actually just going to pull up Conor McGregor here. And the reason I'm doing that is because as I look down, Nate Diaz, obviously not bothered by him. Aldo became stronger after him. Dustin Poirier became mentally stronger after that fight. The book, we don't know about Mendes and Seaver. We'll find out but Poirier, without question, and he talks about it. He talks about experiencing that and how it made him mentally stronger. Aldo probably won't ever give Conor that credit, but it definitely worked for him. And so I think very much that made him mentally stronger. But here's the other thing on, you mentioned if Aldo were to lose, people would say, maybe the Aldo era is over. And if Max Holloway were to lose, people would say, he's got a long time. What people say can have no bearing on you. You can prepare yourself for real for that to be meaningless. And when you go into fight, and when the very best do, I can't relate to this, but and neither can any of us. We think we can imagine what these words mean, but we can't really relate because we're not superhuman. We haven't trained ourselves to this superhuman level that they have. But when Jose Aldo walks in to face Chad Mendes or Frankie Edgar or Ricardo Lamas or Max Holloway, he does it free of the consequences. He does it free of the outcome. He does it free of the meaning. And he just goes in there and fights. That's what it is to perform at the highest level. Against Conor McGregor, that seemed maybe he couldn't do that. But Conor McGregor ratchets that up so incredibly high that you feel you have to perform for Brazil and you have to perform to prove something and you have to perform to shut this guy's mouth. And doing that undermines your ability to perform. This is proven. This isn't me making shit up. This isn't me theorizing. This is, if you were to talk to the highest level psychology consultants and sports psychologists in the game, they'll tell you this. Performance at its best is free of consequences. And so Jose Aldo has been capable of that his entire career, save maybe one night. Max Holloway seems to have been. But every fight is a unique experience, and he's never been against the greatest featherweight in the world in Brazil with everything on the line for his dream to come true. And that's why you prepare mentally, and that's why this is real. These mental aspects of combat or performance of any kind are real.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating story going into the fight. I know I know you don't like this, Robin, but we're going to give it a go anyway. I mean, I want to know where your heart's lying here. We don't want an exact prediction, but what feels closer to you? Who do you think may win this one? Does your heart lean one way or the other at this point?
Yeah, it does. And I know what you're saying. I know you don't like to make predictions. And the reason I don't is every layer I peel back provides you with more questions. Now, it's easy to make a prediction if you don't have any connection to the weight of what we just discussed, the psychological realities of how that makes a young man like Max Holloway or a proven vet like Jose Aldo perform. So somebody said to me the other day, "You're scared to make predictions, bro." I'm like, no, most people are scared to say they don't know. And I'm not afraid to say I don't know. However, you gun to my head. I can see Max Holloway going in there and showing that he truly is on another level. And I'm feeling, if you told me that I had to pick and somebody's going to harm my dog, that's what I would pick. And my dog is so cute, and he's old. But that's what I'd pick. But having said that, as you know, there's so many variables. Somebody eats the wrong food on fight day and everything goes to shit.
Yeah.
You know?
Hopefully they're staying away from, any beef tartare on fight night. And don't worry, Robin. Don't feel bad that we sort of forced you into this corner to do a prediction, because you know Submission Radio. You know how we do. Everything's always gun to your head. So we appreciate the honesty, and you're obviously saying the theory about people being afraid to say they don't know. We wish we were that ballsy a lot of time, but.
No, I don't actually mind it. I just like the discussion. I think when somebody's like, "What's your pick?" and somebody just arbitrarily says it, I think that's fairly pointless. But if you have the discussion of what might and what you're also thinking and why that's bothering you and why you're uncertain of that, to me that's more interesting. And in the end, you have to gun to my dog's head to get it out of me. But finally, I said Max Holloway.
Yeah.
Your dog's a cute little chihuahua, and people can go on Instagram and have a look at him. Like, you gave him a treat, and you made him make a scary face. I got to teach my dog to do that too, Robin. All right, well, look, I'm sure we'll be talking to you very soon, Robin. We'll be breaking down more fights. There'll be plenty to talk to you about. There always is in the MMA world. Of course, good luck in your audition, guys. Make sure to subscribe to Robin's YouTube channel for all of his latest videos. There is a ton of really, really fun stuff, really raw stuff, really real stuff. We're actually amazed at how much content you pump out during these events. There's interviews with not just fighters, but obviously coaches, even media personalities. We saw a fun one with you at Luke Thomas and a whole bunch of other things. You guys are chilling, you guys are drinking beer, so it's kind of like if you like Robin's stuff on the Fight Network, it's I would say even better, and there's a lot more fun and there's a lot more free reign here. So follow him there on Twitter as well, at Robin Black MMA, and we always have a lot of fun with you, as we did just now, Robin. Thanks so much for jumping on with us and chatting with us.
Thanks, guys. We will see you soon. UFC 212. Enjoy the hostilities.
Hey, this is Tony Okagui Ferguson, and you guys listen to Submission Radio. Keep tuning in, guys.
All right, guys, I hope you're enjoying the show. Big show, a lot of fun, a lot of discussion on this show, Cass. We love it. We love breaking things down, having a bit of a chat about stuff. And before this show finishes up, we have a few things to talk about amongst ourselves. Some stuff been happening in the world of MMA. Last week, unfortunately, the show wasn't around, so we didn't get a chance to really talk about this one thing that happened, and that is, of course, a little bit of not a scuffle, but a bit of a confrontation. Things were done. A shoddy video was shot. You want to? Where do we pick up from exactly what went on?
Well, I mean, I think by now everybody knows what's going on. We've all seen that video, which was basically recorded with a potato. I remember when I saw that thumbnail, I thought, "Oh, finally the footage!" And then you see it, and you're like, "Oh, wow, somebody was right in the way when the punch actually landed." So that was a bit of a disappointment. Yeah. I think everybody knows what's happened. I think everyone's kind of, and to be honest, everyone's kind of finished debating whether it's wrong or right and things like that. But well, we want to sort of lay into our thoughts really quickly because we were away. Look, I think Magana trolling Cyborg and making fun of her face when she's doing charity work with children, Cyborg's own father is battling cancer. Yeah, that's really, really low. And I think considering that most fighters talk trash to other fighters in order to set up fights, whereas Angela and Cyborg, they're multiple divisions apart and they'll never fight. I'm not really sure what incentive Angela had for talking trash about Cyborg and, doing it so insistingly. I don't know, maybe she wanted to capitalize on the anti-Cyborg fans and make them their own. But look, to be honest, and I know a lot of people disagree, I don't think it gives Cyborg a complete pass to punch someone in the face, even if they are a fighter. I mean, if somebody was to bully us or talk shit to us or whatever, cyberbully, if you want to call it that, us online, does that give us the right to go and punch them in the face? If you guys said something to us, if we saw you, does that give us the right to punch you in the face? I don't think so. I also don't like this term cyberbullying, actually, because I think that these days, in today's society, when you can block people with a single click or mute them, it's very rare that you're in a situation online where you are 100% forced to deal with somebody's interactions. You can log off, you can turn off your computer, you can block them. It's very easy. And, Magana is a strawweight. She's insignificant to Cyborg, so I think it shows more strength for Cyborg to not confront her and just ignore her like she's not even worthy of being on her radar. I understand a lot of things about it, and I've got a lot more thoughts. Before I go on a tangent, Dennis, I'm curious what you think.
I agree with you. I don't think it's right to punch someone in the face, even if they are saying stuff to you, especially at a place like the UFC resort where, you kind of want to try and act professionally, but it's really tough. I mean, look, I've never been in a situation like Cyborg. I know she's been in a super tough situation. We've heard from her management that times are a bit tough for her. I know career-wise, she's going through this thing with the UFC, and I'm not saying what she did was right, but, I've never been in a state of mind where someone sort of made those comments about something like that, where it was so personal to me. So because I've never been in a situation like that, it's kind of hard for me to say what I would do in it, but at the end of the day, I guess you just want everybody to try and be professional. And we're looking for things to be professional, streamlined, things not to sort of go back to the old days of giving people the wrong idea about MMA. So I think from that perspective, you definitely want to stay away from the sort of negative perception a lot of media outlets have of MMA, which is, fighters are these beings that go in and just, want to destroy each other and show people that it is a sport and it is more fan-friendly than it seems. But I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. It seems like you've got a few things that you want to share with us.
Well, I mean, look, the truth is Cyborg felt disrespected by Magana's insults, which I understand, right? So she confronted her, and as an emotional reaction, I don't think this was something thought out. I don't think Cyborg went and planned like, I'm going to smash this bitch. As an emotional reaction, punched her in the face, which again, as a human being who also has, feelings and feels things and emotions, I totally understand. But there are two main issues. One, Cyborg's in a position where she could be potentially UFC champion in her next fight, maybe, depending on how things play out, a huge star, advance her career, and make a lot of money. So by punching Magana, she puts that position in jeopardy by risking legal troubles. It's also more stress and negative energy spent on dealing with a potential lawsuit. Or imagine if she has to go to court, which, there's an entirely, there's a possibility that will happen now. Does she really want to waste her day doing that? I think her reaction was entirely emotional. I think if she really thought back, and I think if she was on a more even keel that day, she probably wouldn't have done that. So in essence, Cyborg's basically hurting herself in the process. So I'm not blaming her. I'm not saying I don't understand her frustration. It just wasn't a wise thing to do. On the other side, I'm curious what potential damages Magana suffered or may have suffered to make her sue Cyborg. Because if there are any real medical costs involved that Magana has had to pay out of her own pocket, well, then I understand why she wouldn't want to pay them. I get it. It's certainly not a good look for a fighter to be suing another fighter for hitting them. I get that. I understand why fans wouldn't like it. But at the same time, if somebody dents your car, why should you be the one paying to fix it? If Cyborg did do serious damage to Magana and Magana has thousands of dollars to pay in medical bills, I understand why she'd be saying, well, I'm not paying that out of pocket. But that's really what the question comes down to. How bad was the damage from the punch? Was there any? And if there wasn't any, well, then I think it's very low to go after Cyborg out of spite and purely just to get even. I mean, from what I've seen, Magana's tweeting things like, can't wait to thank Cyborg for all the money I'll be getting. And, that's kind of hard to respect, especially if somebody's going out of their way to play victim in order to hurt somebody financially or anyway, really. And again, I don't know what damage there was, but I really do question it, seeing as fighters go through, you see this all the time, fighters go through 5-round wars or they get knocked out cold and they often don't spend nights in hospital. But after getting one punch from Cyborg that kind of landed barely, Angela apparently, according to her Twitter, spent 4 days in hospital. So I don't know. And then you got Brandon Vera he's claimed that Angela was at a Snoop Dogg concert later that night. If that's the case, then it throws a massive wrench in the whole, getting a release from hospital 4 days later thing that makes Angela, look beyond bad. So ultimately, I think there were two wrongs. Angela shouldn't have taken such a low road. She should also expect that, different people may react differently. Cyborg should have been thicker skinned and held back purely for the sake of her own career. And, if Angela really did have to pay a lot of money in medical fees, I get it. I get why she wants to sue, but if she's not, if she just wants to sort of milk it for money and attention, then it's beyond sad in my opinion.
Yeah, it's tough. Look, I'll say this on record. I'm not a big fan of what, Magana said. I think when you say certain things, there's a cost to your actions. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I wouldn't do the same thing in Cris Cyborg's spot. I'd like to think I would, but I don't know. I've been in similar situations. I've been angry. I've gotten physical with people who said some really nasty things about me. But then I've said nasty things about people as well. What I can say is I'm just not a fan of how sort of Magana has, I suppose, acted towards fighters and some of the trash talk that she's done for a really, really long time. And the stuff that she said, it was pretty disrespectful and made me lose a little bit of respect for her. I know what Brendan Various said over there when they asked her to leave the camp, and he spoke about some things about her as well. You know, I don't know on that level. I just know from what I see right on social media, and a lot of the time I kind of shudder a little bit about the stuff that she says. So sometimes I wish, it's crazy because a lot of the time I'm like, man, I wish this person would speak up and say something. But with her, I'm almost like, I wish fighting did the talking for her sometimes rather than her say that. So I think it's a really unfortunate situation. When you're a professional athlete, I will say, because I'm not a professional athlete, but when you're a professional athlete, professional is a big part of it, and you have to be able to deal with, you know, trolls and people saying these ridiculous things. So, you know, you want to expect more from Cris Cyborg. I think Cris, her values, what she believes in, maybe to her she believes she did the right thing, didn't realize she was doing the wrong thing, and at the end of the day, if it stops her from fighting, if it affects her career, and it sends the wrong message to sort of young people that watch MMA, which is I can just go up and punch people in the face, I'm definitely not sort of along with that ride for sure.
Well, it's kind of like with John Jones, where a lot of his troubles have actually been outside of the cage, and he's made certain decisions which you look at and you think, well, that's just poor judgment and poor risk management. I think it's kind of the thing with Cyborg. Like, I you know, again, as a human being, I understand the frustration. I think that what happened was, and we don't really see what happened before that video started actually being recorded, but it probably started off as a little thing. They crossed paths. Maybe they were, I don't know, walking past each other at a buffet table, grabbing some delicious, I don't know, lobster or whatever was there, and then, you know, one thing led to another, and all of a sudden, you know, Cyborg standing there's a bunch of people surrounding them, and maybe she felt like there was pressure on her to do something about it. I don't know. Or maybe she rode in there on a horse and said, I'm going to get this bitch, and she's going to get it coming. I don't know. But I know there's a lot of people out there who were saying, like, well, she talked shit, Magana talked shit, so she had it coming. A lot of fighters said the same thing, and I just, you know, like, I get it, but I just can't get behind that attitude. I just don't think the world should work like that, and I don't think people should have that mentality that, hey, if somebody talks shit about me, they deserve to get smashed, they deserve to get hit, because it's a very slippery slope. And, you know, I don't want to sound like, you know, a baby. I'm the furthest thing away from politically correct, but you never know. I mean, like, if you have that attitude in life, you might decide, hey, I'm going to get someone back, and then you get them back, and then they want to get you back, and then they want to come with their friends, and then knives are involved, and the guns involved. So I just don't think that situation helps. And obviously, you know, I'm not saying that's going to happen with fighters, but hey, there have been situations. Fighters have been killed in gyms. People have come over in Brazil and other parts of the world, and bang, all of a sudden they're dead. And, you know, it's not just their career that's over, it's their entire life and their family, etc. So that's why I can't really get behind that. But I understand from Cyborg's perspective.
It's going to be like a Biggie Tupac rivalry between Angela and Cyborg. Yeah, it's all just crazy stuff. It's all just crazy stuff. You know, Cass, speaking of other crazy stuff, I mean, we spoke about it with Brett earlier on in the show, but we never really gave our thoughts as to if we're fans of this TJ Dillashaw Demetrious Johnson matchup. And I guess this is a big hot topic in the world of MMA. Some people are against it, some people are for it. Where are you sitting at when it comes to that matchup?
Well, all right, let's start with why Demetrious Johnson seems uninterested in this fight, because that's one of the biggest talking points. You got TJ Dillashaw, this hot young kid saying, hey, I'm going to go down to 125, I'm going to fight you, I'm going to rough you up. And then most fighters you would expect to say, hey, all right, no worries, I'll do it. I'm going to fight you anytime, anywhere. And that's not the case in Demetrious's situation. Let's say the record straight. I don't think Demetrious is scared, but I think he feels undervalued and he wants some kind of leverage in this situation and in his relationship with the UFC. And maybe he feels like if he does beat Anderson Silva's record, his stock would rise even higher. And that's the key to the UFC being more open to super fights with him and paying him more and him making all that money that I think he deserves. The truth is, though, even if he does beat Anderson Silva's record, I don't think it gives him the same kind of, or any kind of greater leverage. I really don't. You know, the UFC, at least until WME IMG gets close to paying off this $4 billion loan, it's an entertainment product where their goal is to create the most marketable matchups, regardless of rank, credibility, or even experience. If you don't believe me, look no further than Dan Henderson, Michael Bisping, Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather, and CM Punk. All perfect examples. They won't push Demetrious Johnson harder purely because he wins another fight and adds a statistic to his resume. They've made it abundantly clear that that does not matter to them. They should. In a fair world, in a fair sport, they should. He's a great guy. He's one of the best fighters walking the planet. And I think you should be rewarded as such. Unfortunately, they won't. I think the other thing at play here is that from every time we've interviewed Demetrious, he's always made one thing clear, almost in a very nonchalant, stone-faced way, and that's that his goal is to break Anderson Silva's record. I think even if he doesn't get paid fairly, even if he's underappreciated, even after he's retired, his career's long over, that achievement, I think, means more to him than anything. And I think that that's something that he wants to look back one day and make sure that he has. It's something that's important to him. Here's the truth, though. This is the most intriguing fight you can currently make at the flyweight division. I don't think you can argue that Ray Borg is more deserving than TJ Dillashaw. Look, TJ and Ray, they're both on 2 fight win streaks, and TJ arguably beats stiffer competition in a higher weight class. TJ is also ranked higher than Borg at that weight class. So I think that gives him all the credentials he needs to fight, immediately for the belt. What do you think, Dennis?
Yeah, I mean, look, a great breakdown, a lot of great points made. I mean, I guess I'll keep it short and sweet. Dana White's excited about this matchup, Demetrious. This is something you've been waiting for your whole career, a matchup where the UFC actually cares about who you fight. It seems like this is a matchup that will get Demetrious that, I suppose, those casual fans and that kind of audience that he's been waiting for his whole life. The deal with me here is, are you paying Demetrious the same amount of money as you would for a Ray Borg fight? Because I think if you're being fair, if you're Dana White, you're being fair, you go, hey, I'm Dana White, I'm excited about this fight. This is going to be an amazing fight. Then you got to give the guy a bit more money. This is when you talk about, all right, people don't really care about Demetrious Johnson. When people say that, or the UFC kind of say, oh, the ratings aren't that good, people don't really care about a lot of his people that he's fighting. Well, you're admitting this is a big fight. You're admitting this is an awesome fight. You're admitting this is going to be awesome for people to watch. And when you admit that, I think at the same time, you owe it to Demetrious to, at least give him a bit more money. Maybe you're not going to meet that price that Demetrious has been throwing around for a really long time now, but you make it worth his while. But if you're Demetrious, I guess this is kind of the fight that you've been waiting for a really, really long time, because I agree with you. I think if he beats Anderson Silva's record, apart from what it does to him mentally and symbolically and, probably deep down inside, it's always been his goal. He always talks about it. I always wanted to beat Anderson Silva's record. To him, it means a lot. But outside that, if he does beat Anderson Silva's record with Ray Borg, I agree with you. I don't think it's going to do too much for him, apart from the fact that he's going to meet his own personal goals. He's spoken to us about the fact that he's not in a position where he can retire and just live off the money that he's made. I think financially and career-wise in terms of big fights, this is the big fight. Maybe Demetrious Johnson doesn't realize that he's been waiting for possibly his whole career. People are going to care about this fight. If he's able to beat TJ Dillashaw in this fight, this opens doors for Demetrious. What kind of doors? Who knows? But this is the fight. I guess. Look, it's not like when Conor McGregor came into the featherweight division and the whole division went booming. But at the same time, it's an opponent people care about. It's a fight that people want to see. It's something that everyone's going to tune in for. And those don't come around very often for Demetrious Johnson. As a matter of fact, they've really never really come around for him. I mean, he's had some great rivalries, Ian McCall, Joseph Benavidez, but this is a lot bigger than all those. So if he doesn't take this TJ Dillashaw fight and then TJ does fight Cody and let's say he loses or wins, or who knows what's going to happen, Cody hits his back again, you don't have a guarantee that another big fight is going to cross your table again, especially in the division that he's in. So is he passing up a huge opportunity? Does he realize he may be passing up a huge opportunity by not taking this fight? I personally, I'd love to see this fight. I really want to see Demetrious get the sort of viewership that he deserves. I want people to be able to see what he's able to do. And I really think this is going to be a fight that goes down in history as something really, really special. But, Brett said it. I mean, he's a human being. If breaking Anderson Silva's record means more to him than, having this huge fight, maybe he thinks, hey, maybe I do want sort of a matchup that is not easier, but, I'm more sort of guaranteed to break that record. But to me, I think if he misses out in this matchup, if he passes it up, I think it might be a big mistake that he regrets later on in the future when he looks back at sort of his career trajectory in the long run.
It's interesting because, obviously let's say he does get paid a decent amount of money for this one. obviously, in the long term, the record will stand longer. So I understand that. I mean, look, I'm of the opinion, I don't think this is like the big fight. I think that he can potentially have bigger fights in the future. You know, if Garbrandt, or like if he fights, say, Garbrandt and Garbrandt's the champ, or if he fights TJ in the future and TJ's the champ, or if he fights, I don't know, let's say Cruz becomes champion again, and then he does super fights, then maybe, you know, he can get more money. Like, I don't think this is a super fight. I just think this is a really, really interesting fight for the division. I think he should get paid more. Because I think he and pretty much everybody in the UFC, all the fighters, have been underpaid. So I think he deserves more money, and hopefully this one makes him more money because of pay-per-view points if he is in fact a main event. I think my thing is, I don't think there's too much. I don't think there's too many reasons why he can say, look, I don't want to fight TJ Dillashaw. It's not like someone saying, hey, DJ, you need to go up in weight. You need to go up to 135. I don't think there's any reason why DJ needs to go up to 135. But when somebody's coming into your own division, I don't think you have too many choices of saying, look, I'm not really going to fight that person. Well, they're in your division. They're making the sacrifice. TJ's the one making the sacrifice. And there's a lot of people are saying, you know, let DJ break the record first. And to me, that mentality defeats the whole purpose and gravity of breaking the record. I mean, I take issue with this word let, as if somebody is helping DJ by giving him the easy way, like, oh, let's let him beat the record. Why should anybody make things easier for anybody who's trying to make history and set a record? Records mean something because they're hard to break. And if TJ goes down to 125 and Demetrious beats him, that right there is an amazing way to break the record with arguably his stiffest test. And if they do it in August, and if it is in Seattle, that's in his hometown, or you know, at least home state of Washington. So I think I think that's what makes the record more special. It's a legacy fight. So, like I mentioned, I don't think anyone can ask DJ to go up, but if somebody comes down to his division, I don't see many reasons why he can say, look, I don't want to take that fight. Unless this is just his way of you know, flashing Ray Borg out there to the UFC and sort of negotiating for more money, which if that's what he's doing, then I'm on board with that.
And I mean, if I could say one thing to Demetrious Johnson, I'd say that, and you know, I feel strongly about this, but people may have a different sort of opinion on it. To me, records don't really mean much unless you're a hardcore MMA fan that really knows his stuff. You know, there's been a lot of fighters in the past who have held records, and they've kind of gone out of the limelight, and people have forgotten again about them. To me, what really matters to fight fans is moments. You want to have special moments in your career. I mean, when I look back on people's fights, I don't look at records. I look at moments. That moment that Anderson Silva was able to beat Robert Whittaker with that backwards jab. Moments like that where you go and sit down with your friends and you talk about things.
Which one? Anderson Silva beating Robert Whittaker?
I mean, Forrest Robert Whittaker.
You're thinking
Can you imagine
Forrest
that?
Whittaker, weren't you?
Yeah, the moment where, I don't even remember the moment, but the one with Anderson Silva beat Forrest Griffin with that backwards jab. Yeah. You know, moments like that where they replay them and highlight reels and you talk about it with your family and friends, and it goes up on Facebook illegally in a little clip that people make money off, possibly. I don't know how that works anymore with Facebook. But anyway, I think this fight gives him a chance to make a special moment. Now, the special moment may be him winning. The special moment may be him losing. You don't always make moments winning or losing, but there's something intangible, something you can feel, something you can remember. People, to me, records aren't like that. A record is there until someone breaks it. You know, it doesn't mean as much to me as when you make special moments. And Demetrious has had a lot of really, really good moments, but unfortunately, people haven't been tuning in to check out a lot of those moments. A lot of not extreme fans, but hardcore fans will be like, oh, remember the time he did this and that. And sure, and he looked amazing in most of his wins. I mean, there's so many great moments, but a special moment, I don't think you could go to a less than hardcore fan and go, oh, look back, tell me what's the Demetrious Johnson moment in his career that stands out in your mind. I think a lot of people would really struggle to do that. And I'm not talking about casual fans. I'm just talking about normal fans in general. So when you get an opportunity to have a guy who's special, to have a matchup that's special, something that people are excited about, and to make that moment, I think from an artistic perspective, mixed martial arts at the end of the day, you know, you want to create those moments. You want to put yourself in opportunities to make those moments. I don't know. I just see this as an opportunity for Demetrious Johnson to have that moment. To me, that matters more than a record. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a bit sentimental.
Well, I've known you for many years, and I can definitely attest to that. You are a sentimental man. Speaking of sentimental, Vitor Belfort, according to him, will be fighting his last UFC fight this weekend at UFC 212. We figure, what better fight to kick things off as far as predictions go? So I'll go first. As far as my official prediction for this fight, When you look at their last few years, Belfort and Marquardt, one of the biggest differences has been that while both men have obviously alternated between wins and losses, Vitor's done it against much better competition. In the last 3.5 years, Marquardt's wins have come against Tandem McRory, CB Dollaway, and going all the way back to 2014, he beat a now retired James Tahuna. Not exactly the stiffest of competition. Vitor's had some big wins under his belt, obviously Rockhold, Bisping, and Dan Henderson twice, but let's be honest, he hasn't looked anything resembling his old self since going off TRT, and majority of those wins, all except Dan Henderson, they were back then when he was on TRT. His last totally clean, controversy-free win came against Dan back in November of 2015. It's been a long time since Vitor Belfort's been in the win column. And it's been a long time since both of these guys have competed. I mean, Vitor Belfort, back in the old school UFC days, competing as a heavyweight, competing as Vitor Gracie, Nate Marquardt being the first king of pancrase. I mean, these guys essentially resemble many, or almost all of the eras in MMA. Vitor started his career in 1996, and Nate started in 99. The crazy thing is, Nate's actually had more fights with 52 compared to Vitor's 39. And you talk a lot of people, I think, look at Nate Marquardt and sort of say, he's not the same guy, he's on the decline, and a lot of people have these images of Nate suffering quite a few TKO losses. He's actually had less in his entire career with only 5, whereas Vitor's had 6 TKO losses, a lot of those coming in the last few years. Look, I believe Marquardt, he's still got KO power in his fist. No matter how old you get, you've almost always still got that KO power. It's the last thing to leave. And, Vitor's chin, it certainly isn't granite these days. So him knocking out Vitor, I'm not ruling it out. It's not completely unrealistic. But at the end of the day, the last 2 guys to really outclass Vitor on the feet were a very young and fast Kelvin Gastelum and a very technically superior Gegard Mousasi. And after so many wars and mileage, I don't really think Nate is, he's not as explosive or fast enough to consistently outstrike Vitor over 3 rounds. So, there's also the fact that Nate in recent years, he's been susceptible to being swarmed early in the fight. And, a lot of people are saying, well, he's got the wrestling. Maybe he can take to Vitor. Vitor's takedown defense, I mean, it hasn't been bulletproof, but really only against the best wrestlers. I think he'll be able to stave off Nate's takedown attempts. And the good thing is the Vitor, he hasn't gone to a decision since 2007. So there's a really good chance this fight isn't going to a decision either. It's kind of like Nate Diaz's motto. Vitor's outcome pattern, it seems to be kill or be killed. And obviously, I don't think he'll kill Nate Marquardt, but I think he'll be able to secure a first round knockout and ride off into the Bellator sunset and potentially fight guys like Chael Sonnen or Wanderlei Silva or who knows, Fedor, anyone else, Dada 5000, anyone. So my official prediction: Vitor Belfort via first round KO.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of Nate Marquardt. When I was began as a fan watching the sport a long time ago, he was one of the guys who was my favorite, and that's why it's been so painful for me to sort of see him retain his UFC contract and be in a lot of these fights where he's just sort of a shell of his former self. I think the big thing when I look at Nate is he's just lost a lot of his confidence, and when someone lands a strike on him, you could just tell he just begins panicking in his head, and it's really obvious. He's just not the same fighter, unfortunately. So to me, I definitely see Vitor going in there, and I agree with your prediction, Cass. I think it's going to be a first-round TKO via flurries, and it'll be a nice moment for Vitor Belfort, and also a bit of a sobering moment for Nate Marquardt, who, who knows, it might be a retirement fight for him as well, depending on what happens over there in Brazil. Let's jump over to the co-main, though. Claudia Gadelha versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz. Cass, how do you see this fight? Because when I think about it, it's not very clear-cut in my mind.
Listen, I think Karolina, she needs to keep the distance in this fight more than anything. She likes to work on the outside with the technical strikes. If she can stick to a strict game plan to be ready for the sprawl, she can potentially pick Claudia apart on the outside and use her footwork and cut angles to avoid Claudia's takedown and clinch attempts. The problem is, for my money, Karolina, she's a little bit slow when pulling back after throwing her strikes, and she's demonstrated in most of her fights in the Joanna fight, and she sometimes sort of lingers in the close range a little bit. I think someone as smothering as Claudia, she'll be able to take advantage and either take her down or at least clinch her up and take her to the fence where she'll either take her down or wear her out against the cage. So I think this strategy will rack up enough points for Claudia to win a decision. Against Joanna, Claudia was doing really well, and she was arguably winning the early rounds until she finally gassed, and then Joanna took over. But the good news for Claudia, this is only a 3-round fight. I think Claudia's got enough in the tank to pull it off, and I mean, for me, I'm intrigued by what Robin said before about Carolina's guard. I haven't really seen her KSW fights. I'm a bad Polak like that. I haven't seen her sweeps. I haven't seen her game off her back. So I guess that makes me even more interested in this fight. But for me, I'm pretty confident saying Claudia v decision.
Yeah, it's interesting because I like what you mentioned about this being a 3-round fight and how that plays into it. I think it's a big, big difference. If this was a 5-round fight, we could potentially be looking at a bit of a different fight for Carolina. But I agree with you. I think Claudia is going to take it by a decision. But just what Robin brought up and you brought up, imagine she blows our mind. Somehow she has this crazy ground game that we just never really thought about. And, she gets up off the ground and she's able to show us some crazy skills off the ground, off her back, through her guard, and just sort of builds the case as to why she's a lot more complete than a lot of people actually thought. I'm really interested in this fight, and I'm actually really happy that they added this fight onto the card. And Anderson Silva's off the card, and I know this isn't really going to be a fight that attracts that many casual fans, but it's going to be something that I'm going to be really interested in watching. And I like how they put it in the co-main event spot, which kind of gives it a bit more, I suppose, importance and weight, which is great for both ladies in the fight. What about the main event, Cass? I mean, we spoke to Luke Thomas about it. Two of the best featherweights getting up against each other in the UFC. It's a fresh fight. A lot of people have been looking forward to this one. Holloway's been on our show. He seems like he's very confident about this fight, looking forward to going into Brazil and shocking the world, shocking the Brazilians over there and shutting them up, taking that title, becoming the undisputed champion. How do you see this one going?
Man, it's going to be a treat either way. It's obviously going to be a technical battle on the feet. I don't see any takedowns here. Aldo's takedown defense is almost, and his wrestling in general is pretty much bulletproof. Holloway, not really the type of guy to go for takedowns, and his takedown defense is really good as well. So it's going to be a fun striking battle. Holloway, statistically, is the more active fighter. He throws more strikes. I think that's interesting. Jose Aldo's defense, though, it's a little bit better. He gets hit less. I would say, for my money, Aldo is faster and more explosive, even though he's a bit older, and he's arguably got the better KO power. I think Holloway will have to pressure Aldo and use that higher volume of his to his advantage. I think that Aldo obviously has these devastating leg kicks, and he needs very little wind-up to make him damaging. But if Max is able to constantly pressure him and if he's sort of backing him up, it's going to be hard for him to really get off on those. Max also uses a lot of body shots. I'm curious how that'll pay off in the later rounds and if he can wear down Aldo. I know sometimes in the past, Aldo had this criticism that he fades in later rounds, but since that Chad Mendes fight, he's really shown that that's not a weakness of his. That's not any kind of issues. And other than McGregor, here's the other interesting thing. Max is arguably the best striker Aldo has faced in a long time. Frankie, very tough opponent, but he's a great boxer and all-around fighter, but he's not as technical and well-rounded or as tall as Max. Chad Mendes, vastly improved version of himself in the second fight, but he's not a pure striker. And before that, the best striker Aldo fought was Mark Hominick, who he beat. So that makes this fight even more intriguing. I also think that we see, and again, obviously other than the Conor McGregor fight, but I think generally we see Jose at his most comfortable when he doesn't have to worry about the threat of the takedown. And I think this is certainly one of those cases. I think that while both men can be flashy and can be creative, Aldo honestly just amazes me with his ability to adapt mid-fight. Robin talked about his changes in the Frankie Edgar fight, where we just saw a completely different version of him compared to his past. I guess general traits. He's an athletic freak. The control over his body and his balance is amazing. There were times in that second Edgar fight where he changed strikes mid-air and was able to hurt Frankie. Also, I think, like I mentioned, Aldo's defense in that Edgar fight was just amazing, and it is better than Max's. I think it's always been there, but it's very rare that Aldo gets hit with clean, damaging punches, and Max just isn't really known for one-hit KO power. I think that honestly, Aldo will be able to find a home for his leg kicks, and his jab will be able to disrupt Max's combinations. So I think the leg kicks will be the biggest. I think not only the weapon of Aldo, but I think in some ways it'll dictate the fight. If Aldo can take away Max's lateral movement, which is one of Max's biggest weapons, or biggest traits at least, if he can take away that lateral movement, and in the later rounds, we see a more stationary Max Holloway, I think Aldo will be able to pick him apart. If Max is able to get those body shots on Aldo and land on him, like a lot of people haven't been able to, then maybe we'll see Aldo sort of slow down towards the later rounds. But ideally, I think we see those leg kicks landing, and my official prediction is Jose Aldo via decision. What do you think, Dennis?
It's such a great breakdown, Cass, as well. It really sort of paints the picture of the fight. And I'm kind of curious as well. I mean, Robin brought up some good points about a lot of fighters that have fought Conor McGregor, guys like Dustin Poirier coming out and sort of improving a little bit. And Aldo just looked so great against Frankie Edgar. It was almost like he learned from that Conor McGregor fight and sort of had something to prove here. And I feel like this is going to be very interesting. I mean, we spoke to Robin about this mental game-wise. Who is more pressure on? Who is coming in here? Who's going to be able to handle the heat? Is it Aldo trying to prove that he can hang in there with a guy like Holloway and showing people that he can solve the Holloway puzzle? Or is it Holloway going in there and showing everyone, hey, I'm the undisputed champion. I deserve this. It's going to be very interesting. I think the point that you brought up with the leg kicks, I think it's going to be a very, very big part of this fight, him wearing down Holloway with those leg kicks. You know, a part of me wants to say that I see Holloway winning this fight because I feel like it would definitely be a lot more exciting for the division or open up some exciting matchups. And also, I see how Aldo is still sort of interested in moving up weight classes and chasing this McGregor fight, which I wonder what's going to happen if he wins. Is he going to stick around? Is he going to try and move up? What's going to happen there? But the way that Aldo fights, the way that he looked against Edgar, the fact that this is going to be a stand-up battle, and like you mentioned, you know, there's no threats of it going onto the ground, and Aldo is really good in those situations. I honestly do believe that he's going to walk away with a decision here. So I agree with your prediction.
All right, well, there you go. Put us down for 2 Jose Aldo's via decisions. And if you do end up losing all your money and your house, do not blame us. All right, we're about to wrap this up. UFC 212 is in a matter of days. I don't know, man. I'm personally excited. I know it's not the biggest card or has the biggest names, but I think there's a lot of intrigue. And I think that for anyone curious whether they should buy it or not, I think the Max Holloway versus Jose Aldo has enough intrigue to at least get my money. Before we wrap up the show, though, before we thank everybody for coming on the show, an impromptu, random, out of nowhere John Wick 2 review. The first one is great. What did you think of the second one, Dennis?
Geez, man, I'll tell you what. I was really disappointed with the second movie. Rotten Tomatoes is an interesting website that I go on to look at movie reviews. And the thing I really like about it is it combines a large amount of scores into one and kind of gives you little excerpts out of reviews with catty comments about the movies, which I enjoy reading. But, man, it does lie sometimes. If you're just going to go with that score, you're not always going to agree with it. I think they gave it a 91% score.
Holy
and when I watched the movie, I just couldn't get anywhere close to that. Look, for me, the first movie, I thought that was a really good movie because there was a story in place, and the story made you want to see John Wick sort of get revenge and made everything that he was doing make a bit of sense. And even though you're in a different world and, you know, a lot of the stuff that he's doing is maybe not realistic and it's still sort of a fictional tale, it's easy to be in there because you have an emotional connection to what he's going through and his motivators and choices that he's making. In the second movie, it's just very difficult, very difficult to stay in the moment and believe what's happening. The premise is a bit absurd. There's no real motivator for what he's doing. You could almost argue that John Wick looks a bit dumb at times.
Yeah.
You lose a little bit of respect for the character. You definitely feel like you're watching a movie rather than you're in a story. And you have these moments where the choices that the story makes and I suppose the things that come out about the world that he's in makes you think that the whole thing's really stupid and just the world that he's in is really dumb, and just again reminds you that you're watching sort of a bit of a dumb movie. So to me, it was very, very disappointing. I really thought they could have done something with this. They could have gone somewhere with this. It kind of looked like they got right back on the horse a little bit too quickly, didn't sort of go through the script process the way they should have, gone through their drafts and really figured out the good way to do it. I will say as well, in the second movie, you don't have as much star power as the first one. I think it kind of hurts a little bit when you don't have that kind of screen presence like you had in the first one. You had a few good actors in the first one. This one sort of had a few no-names. Yeah, I don't know. To me, it was a real letdown. There's also talk of them already jumping on a third movie and that possibly being out very, very soon, which sort of indicates to me they're just trying to squeeze money out of this one. I think with the first one, they initially thought it wasn't going to be successful, and maybe they spent a little bit more time on it, not really expecting much of a return. It was really successful for them, and they made a lot of money, and that's the problem with the studios. When they make a lot of money off a movie like that, they start pushing to get it out quicker and quicker and quicker, and it loses the magic that made it special in the first place. So to me, man, I got to give it 1.5 Timothy Johnson mustaches. Yeah, I just really didn't enjoy it. To me, a movie's all in a story, and then everything else that happens is just on top of it, like the action and things like that. And if things don't make sense, I just have a real hard time enjoying the action. So yeah, a real low score for me, and just a very disappointed time in the movies. I think I actually watched it with my girlfriend, and I think it was with my girlfriend, and I think I talked her into watching it, and it could have been someone else. I think it was a couple of weeks ago. Side girl, side piece. Could have been Winston, my dog, who, by the way, it's his second birthday. So happy birthday, Winston. We'll have a big party this week. There's going to be other dogs invited. But the thing is, yeah, but back to the review. The thing is, it was hard for me to, whoever went with me and watched the movie, it was just hard for me to sort of walk out of that movie and be like, because before the movie, I'm like, oh, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be great. Look at this review. The first one was so good. And they're like, yeah, I don't know. And then after walking out, being like, yeah, you're right. Totally shit. Can't believe I talked you into this. Please come back and watch another movie with me. So not only a bad movie, but a negative impact on my life. Casper, your review.
Yeah, I hear you punched Usher on the way out of sheer fury. Man, I think you took the words out of my mouth. It's actually amazing. A lot of what you were saying, I was like, holy shit, it's literally exactly what I was going to say. I think if we did some kind of like co-op review, written review, we'd have pretty much the same article. I found, like, when you watch the first one, I mean, spoilers alert for anyone who hasn't seen the first one. It's really simple. His wife dies. You know, she leaves him a dog behind, and that's basically the last, little bit of her. Some asshole thugs, they steal his car and they kill that dog. All right, we hate those guys. Let's kill these guys. And that's what the whole movie is about. It's so simple, and the dog's so cute that anybody, who's human and has a heart can get behind that story. It's so simple. This storyline, I don't know what they were thinking. It was so stupid and nonsensical and convoluted. What's worse is that there wasn't a lot of dialogue, and I think that's kind of one of the things that made the first one good. You didn't really need a lot of dialogue. There was, it was a very simple thing to understand. But here, it's like there wasn't a lot of dialogue, but when there was, it was so unnecessary, and it felt to me so pretentious and just dragged out. There was this scene, I won't say anything about it, but there was a scene with a woman, and when you watch the movie, you'll know which one. I just think, I think I fell asleep 3 times during that scene thinking, Jesus, is it still going? How is the scene still going? I didn't really like the locations where it was shot. I didn't think that made any sense. I didn't like the bad guy. I didn't like the side bad guys. Ruby Rose is in here trying to do her best Ronda Rousey impression and basically look like the tough guy. I didn't enjoy that. She plays some kind of deaf or dumb or a combination of both assassin. I think you made a really good point of, well, if she's deaf and she's an assassin, why doesn't someone just sneak up behind her and, just take her out? So I didn't really appreciate that. And, like you mentioned, like when you watch the first one, you kind of get this idea that these characters in this world above us, like we would struggle to understand it. They're somehow better and superior to us, and we would almost look up to them. They're in this crazy assassin world. Here, you look at them and think, are you stupid? Like, the characters come off so dumb and pretentious, and you feel smarter than them. There's some good action scenes. I like the cinematography, but I don't know. You definitely don't get that connection. And the way I agree with you 100%. The way that it feels like a cash grab. It just seems like this movie, because there's this one and there's going to be a third one as well. You feel like this one and the third one could have been combined to make one sequel. It just feels like such a dragged out movie, and the ending is by far one of the most frustrating and unsatisfying endings I have seen in a movie in a long time. I won't spoil it, but basically when the credits hit, you will probably sit there and say, are you kidding? Is this really the end of the movie? Just when it seems like it's ramping up, really, now you're going to end the movie. It is like, imagine if you're having sex with a girl and it is just the most terrible sex ever, and you're just waiting. You're like, well, you know what? At some point I'm going to finish and it's going to be over and I can get on with my day. Imagine if the girl says to you, we're going to stop here. We're going to continue in a week. And you say, why? I was almost out. I was just looking forward to that ending. I don't want to continue this. This is terrible. That's John Wick 2. That's the feeling that you get when you watch John Wick 2. And the point and sort of thing that they push by the end of the movie is basically that everybody in New York City is an assassin. And it just takes so much out of it. It makes it seem so stupid. In the first one, which I watched after watching the second one, being so disappointed, I thought to myself, was I just surprised by the first one? Is it because it just caught me off guard and I knew nothing about it and that's why I enjoyed it? I watched it again, and arguably I liked it even more. I appreciated the first one so much more. I was like, wow, this is such an amazing movie. And the second one is just, it is just miles apart. And I think even in the first one, you kind of feel like it's very intimate. There's a few of these assassins, they're running around, they've got their own hotel. It's special. Here, the picture they're trying to paint is like literally every single person in New York is an assassin. It is the dumbest plot and honestly one of the dumbest movies. I'm a little bit kinder than you. 2.5 Timothy Johnson mustaches. Some of the action scenes are actually pretty cool. There's a huge amount of MMA focus on the action scenes, a lot of jiu-jitsu moves, a lot of sambo, a lot of judo throws and stuff like that, but man, it falls so short and the ending is infuriating. You know what, screw that, I'm changing it, not 2.5, two Timothy Johnson mustaches. That's the official rating for me. Disappointing and just shit ass all around.
Yeah, I know. And, we've got to get Keanu Reeves on the show one day. If you guys are listening to the show, make sure to tweet Keanu, find him online, tell him to come on Submission Radio, because there are things to talk about. He's got a lot of good movies. And apparently he's a really, 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 really cool guy. So we'd love to get him on the show, talk some UFC. But with that, Cass, it's the end of the program. A big thanks to Brett Okamoto, Luke Thomas, Tommy Toehold, Robin Black for coming onto the program. Happy birthday to Winston, who is now 2. I guess that's about it. Anything else we want to mention to the fans?
I think that's pretty much it. I would just probably double down on the big thank you to Tommy Toehold. Obviously, we thank all our guests, but Tommy Toehold's always kind enough to stop by, be on the program. Make sure to check out his stuff. Make sure to check out his YouTube channel, youtube.com/TTHS. Buy some stuff with his face on it, and we'll be. Oh, there's a fun, actually a big announcement coming regarding Submission Radio and the future of Submission Radio. We can't unveil anything, but we can't wait. We're counting down the days and the minutes. So look out for that. A bit of a teaser there. And till then, we'll catch you guys next week.